Hi, I'm Ben,
And I'm Josh.
and this is the Bad at Magic podcast, a podcast about games, life, and other things, and welcome to episode 40.
So this is the part where I talk about something interesting about 40. Well, Ben, I'm going to go completely opposite. I'm going to talk about something interesting about negative 40.
What's interesting about negative 40?
Very few things, but one thing that I thought was interesting was negative 40 is where Celsius and Fahrenheit temperature scales intersect.
Awesome.
So everybody knows that Celsius and Fahrenheit are just different ways of measuring temperature. But if you plot along a line on some kind of standardized scale, then it draws two lines across as energy increases and what the measurement of the actual temperature is.
Yeah, they're both linear, they just have a different slope, which means at some point they're going to intersect.
Right, and that point is negative 40.
Okay.
And so Celsius, for those of us who don't know, is the metric version of temperature that is used by most of the planet, I think. It's based on things that make sense. So the freezing point of water is 0 degrees Celsius, and the boiling point of water is 100 degrees Celsius. Those are the two fixed points. It creates a line, you divide it evenly, and then you just measure temperature using that.
Slope equals rise over run.
Yeah, super easy. It makes sense. 0 and 100, those are temperatures everybody can understand. Fahrenheit, on the other hand, which is used by us and a handful of other backwards countries, is based on garbage. Just literal garbage.
It's also just another line with some fixed points, isn't it?
Yes, but this is the problem, is the fixed points make no flippin' sense. So the literally, like the historical document that they created the Fahrenheit scale off of, written by some guy named Fahrenheit, he picked 32 degrees as the freezing point of not water, but he picked 0 degrees as the freezing point of a mixture of water and ammonium chloride. He created a random brine solution with some salt and said, when this freezes, I'm going to call that 0. Now, Ben, that would be fine if then he said 100 degrees was the boiling point and then used his line on that. But he didn't. He decided, he said his other point on this temperature scale was, and then the average body temperature of a human person is going to be 96. Literally, that is what he based it off of.
Okay.
It was later refined.
You mean the number 96 was arbitrary?
Yes, the number 96 and the temperature that was 96 was completely arbitrary. That he just picked out of the
but
air.
it didn't turn out to be 96 anyway. It's 98 and change.
Well, this is the thing, is that was the historical document which the Fahrenheit scale was based off of. It was later refined and defined specifically that the freezing point of pure water was 32 degrees. And then they got rid of the body temperature thing because that was stupid and arbitrary. And they decided that the boiling point of the same pure water was going to be 212 degrees. I don't know how they landed on 212, but those are the 2 points that define the line that is the Fahrenheit scale. And then that's when the average human body temperature, actually it's 98.6 on this new updated version.
All right, I found a map I'm going to post on the Facebook photo album that I do every time we do a new episode. Of all the countries in the world that use Fahrenheit, and there's only 5. It's the United States and a couple of islands in the Caribbean. Bahamas, Belize, Cayman Islands, Palau. That's it.
Everybody
5 countries.
Everybody in the U.S. hates Celsius and they hate kilometers. And I'm sorry, people, but we've got to change that thought process because we're the only people that use it because it makes no sense. My son asked me the other night when he was learning about units of measure with centimeters and millimeters and meters, and he goes, "What's an inch based off of?" Well, son, there's 12 inches in a foot. Yeah, but why? Because there is, and there's 3 feet in a yard. And there's this many yards in a league.
Come on, you should have been like, because that's the length of the king's forearm.
But it wasn't. Napoleon, one of the things that he wanted to unify Europe about was they had different measures of inches. A French inch was different than an English inch, which is why, actually, everybody thinks Napoleon was so short, because in English
Why are you
inches,
talking about Napoleon? This isn't based on Napoleon.
But it is. The English version, like inches and feet, were all different for all the countries that used them at the time. And this is why all those countries realized, this is stupid. And they gave up and they adopted a standardized unit of measure.
Yeah.
They're only, like I said, these third world backwards countries like, I don't want to say any names, like the U.S., It's terrible. It makes no sense.
I imagine if we'd reelected Donald Trump, this is the kind of nonsense we would be dealing with right now. I'm redefining the measurement system to be based on my body.
That's a whole dark hole of really bad jokes.
Well, we did an alternate universe episode. Maybe sometime we'll do another Patreon exclusive where we talk about, where you and I just go on about, well, now that Trump's reelected, COVID is rampaging throughout we'll just go off on this alternate timeline.
I will say that is an interesting fringe benefit of overthrowing the U.S. government forcibly, is that you get to redefine standard units of measure so that portions of your body could be larger than they actually are.
I'm not fat. I changed the definition.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of.
All right. Well, one thing. So having lived in Europe for 5 years, we use Celsius exclusively while we were over there. And I overcame the cognitive hump that Americans can't seem to get over with the metric system and with these temperature numbers. And it's really simple. It's just the ability to think in your mind in terms of an alternate system of understanding. Like, for instance, what is the number for a comfortable room? You know what it is in Fahrenheit. What is it?
In my house, it's 72.
Right, 72. Do you know what it is in Celsius?
Probably somewhere in the, I want to say 30s.
Right. No, definitely not.
No?
It's 21.
Oh, I was way too high.
Yeah, and because the slopes are different, it doesn't translate so real well. So as long as you're thinking of it as like one number in relation to another number, it's not great. That's one thing I like Fahrenheit better, because the line has a higher slope. So the difference between like a fever and a comfortable cup of coffee is enough to understand it. But in Celsius, they're really close together.
Oh, I see.
Or a hot summer's day, or a day that's chilly but not cold, or a day that's super freezing cold.
This is the thing, is you nailed it when you talked about the slope, because you can't just think of one number and go from there, because it gives you no frame of reference.
Right.
So as you're making the translation, you have to know two numbers. This is the temperature of a comfortable room, and this is the temperature of, pick another thing.
A room that's too warm.
Or yeah, just for you, and that gives you, like, you can make those translations in your mind. But
right.
But that's an unnecessary translation. If we had just grown up with these systems,
I get it.
We wouldn't have to make we wouldn't have to like convert it in our head.
But like the different, when you're have your normal human temperature of 98.6, or when you have a fever of 104, that's a freaking lot. And a fever of 105, you're going to die. And that's only 1 degree difference in Fahrenheit, which has a higher slope. In Celsius, you can barely even measure it. It's a decimal point.
Yeah, that's a bad example, though, because we're ridiculously frail meat sacks anyway. So we need something that has a little bit more range to it.
I get it. But it's not as bad as you say. It's stupid in that the numbers are kind of arbitrary, but I like having a steeper sloped line than a more gradually sloped line, even if 0 and 100 aren't nice natural points for the freezing and boiling point of water.
So it just gives you a more granular sense of the temperature?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to give you a trick to this, Ben. You ready? This is going to blow your mind.
Go ahead.
Whenever you see a Celsius temperature, just multiply it by 10. We'll call it the rich scale, and then it gives you 3 digits, and it's so granular.
Yeah, but your instruments that measure it have to be that granular. Anyway, it's the same problem with things like weight. When you talk about losing weight, like in England, they still talk in stone. Do you know how much a stone is?
20 pounds.
14 pounds.
Dang it, I was close.
So to say I lost 2 stones is like saying I lost 28 pounds.
But is that what they write on your medical chart at the hospital, or is that just what people say?
No, it's stupid. England's such a weird mix. Like, they measure their speedometer in miles per hour, but they measure their height in meters.
Well, but British is the quintessential do as I say, not as I do, because they conquered the world, acknowledged that the metric system was better, and made all of their children use it, but they're not going to use it. They're the parents. They'll use whatever they want.
Yeah. Anyway. Last time, you and I were talking about Magic the Gathering. I had thrown out that the latest set released by Wizards of the Coast, called Kaldheim, was based on Norse mythology, and said that it was a top-down sign. And you're like, stop pointing that out. They're all top-down designs. So I want to talk about the distinction between top-down design and bottom-up design.
Ben was technically correct, and he is going to leverage that against me for the next 20 minutes. Ready, Ben?
The best kind of correct.
The best kind of correct.
So using the word top down and bottom up has a meaning that simply refers to, at the end, you're going to arrive at a card design or a group of card designs. And what was influential in arriving at the end design? Was it a concept based on a fantasy world and characters and story, or was it a concept that came from the mechanics of the game, the bones underneath everything, the colors and the spell types and the casting cost and those kinds of things?
I always think of it as the top down is you're looking at the big picture. What do we want the big picture to look like? And then we'll fill in the gaps as we zoom in. And then the bottom up design is the other way around, where you start with the small nitty gritty details and you piece them together and then try to build a story around it.
Yes, but, and you know this, I think you just forgot that you know it, sometimes the big picture they're looking at is the mechanics, not the story.
That's true.
So, for instance, when I started playing Magic the Gathering, there were 2 sets that were currently in the standard rotation, one Kamigawa and one Ravnica. And Kamigawa was very much a top-down set, and Ravnica was very much a bottom-up set.
Yes, it was. Kamigawa was based on traditional East Asian mythology.
Yeah, feudal Japan, like samurai and...
There are samurai, ninjas, spirits, and like a big epic story of some theft that happened in the spirit world and a big war that happened. Yeah, it was very flavor.
Yes. And Ravnica, on the other hand, was... Wizards of the Coast said, hey, on this cool thing we have called the color wheel, where we have the 5 colors of magic, every color has 2 possible pairs. What if we designed a whole set around these color pairs? And that is very much bottom up.
Yes, they decided that we're going to put these 2 things together, these 2 colors. Where do these 2 colors overlap, and how do we fill that out to be like a story-based or mechanic-based system?
So then they said, what would a world where there were a bunch of these color pairs look like? And they're like, well, it'll be a big city planet, and it'll all be based around 10 guilds, and each guild has an identity that's derived from the mechanics of the game.
And for listeners that may not play Magic the Gathering, first of all, shame on you. Go play Magic the Gathering. But they do an excellent job, the manufacturer of this game, in building in like feelings to the different colors. There's 5 colors in the game, and each color has a very clear identity. The longer you play, the more solidified it becomes in your mind as this is something quintessentially this color, and these are the things that this color does well, and these are the things that this color is bad at, and all of them are different in subtle ways. And so to make them overlap is very interesting.
And those abilities and restrictions are what give the game its feel and its interaction that keeps it fresh and new. And the idea that you could take a story and then drape it over the top of the bones of the game and come out with an interesting set, or you could look at what's interesting about the bones of the game and have that feed you a story, also can help you arrive at an interesting place. And I don't think they're necessarily superior to the other. So I made a list of a few top-down or flavor-driven designs that came to mind immediately. One set they did called Innistrad was set in a gothic horror universe, where it feels like some Middle Eastern town Eastern European town set in the mountains where the local human populace is being beset upon by werewolves and mad scientists and those kinds of things. And it was a really cool set.
I did not play that set, but I have since played a lot of cards from that set. And even the art from all of the cards in that set just looks bad. Like, I don't want to live in this place.
Yeah, it was great. It was a really cool set. The storyline eventually leads to the point where they invoke something from Lovecraftian horror known as Cthulhu, and unleash these otherworldly monsters on the earth, and it just all goes nuts.
Awesome. That's the Eldrazi you're referring to.
Yes. Now, on one hand, so you have a very kind of like earthy but familiar idea of vampires and werewolves and that kind of stuff. And then on the other hand, they have a set in like some otherworldly place that is this steampunk world they called Kaladesh. And that was like, what if we had a world where everyone had the ability to capture and utilize this energy, and how would that interact with the game? And they made a whole set around that. And it had flying vehicles, and they introduced a completely new card type, and it was a really cool set, but it was so different.
I also did not play for that set. I was out of Magic for a very long time, but I have since played cards from that set, and I have played the new card type, which is vehicles. And I think the vehicles are very interesting ideas.
So you had Gothic horror, steampunk, feudal Japan, and Norse mythology, and those were all top-down set design. Now, we already mentioned Ravnica, which was a bottom-up set design. I thought of a few others, like, for instance, Mirrodin. They were looking at the bones of the game, and they're like, people like artifacts. What if we had a world where everything was artifacts? The land's artifacts, the creature's artifacts, everything's artifacts. And they're like, okay. And they made, like, the most broken set ever.
Yeah, but Mirrodin wasn't the first all-artifact set. Like, we can go all the way back into the way back machine into the early 90s, where they had... there was a set that came out very early on where they had talking about the Brothers' War between Mishra and Urza, and they had a whole set that it was a ton of just broken artifacts, and that was also one of the most broken metagames in Magic history.
You predated my game knowledge.
Oh, I have the full novel of the Brothers' War sitting within arm's reach. It was not a very good read, but it did mention a ton of the cards that were in it. It was the Legacy. Urza's Legacy was the set I'm referring to.
Also, back in that era, Wizards of the Coast were like, what if we did a set where all of the spells in the set were creatures?
Which set was that?
Legions, it was called.
Oh, okay.
And that is a bottom-up design. You know, it's not like let's do a jungle world or, you know, let's do the 40,000 Tales of Arabian Nights or something like that. It was, what if all of our spells were creatures, and then let's make a world based on that.
Very cool. Yes, so they've done it both ways, top down and bottom up. Of those sets, all the ones that you've listed, you've played a bunch of them. Which ones do you like better?
Well, Ravnica is kind of an outlier because there are some really interesting things that have come out of creating a world based around the interactions of the color pie.
And I have to throw up a finger on this because Ravnica is disproportionately represented in the sets of Magic the Gathering because it was far and away the best-selling set that they've ever made. And since then, Wizards has gone back to, quote-unquote, that story place 3 times.
4 or 5 times, yeah. So, well, there's another thing that they've done about that. After they did all the 2-color pairs, they're like, well, what about all the 3-color pairs? And they made a world around the allied pairs and then around the what they call shards, which are 2 allied and then 1 across the color pie. And that also created a world, and I think those are pretty good too. But I think for the overall coherence of a set, if you're starting from a top-down place, it just, you grok it better. You know, the players get it faster and it just feels more natural than saying, hey, what if we made a set where all of the cards were gold?
Now, you see, I'm gonna take 2 recent sets and I'm going to compare and contrast because Kaldheim, like you said, is top down, and honestly, like, it's fine, it's a good set, but
Norse mythology.
Norse. What did I say?
You said Kaldheim. I was just
it's based on Norse mythology. And I don't know. It's there and I get it, but I don't feel the story leaping off of the cards and the mechanics at me like I did with the set that came right before it with the mutate mechanic. What's that one called? We've already forgotten. Like, it's the set that came out before this one, and we've just completely thrown Ikoria.
Yeah.
That one had it was built around the mechanic of mutate, where you had a creature, and then you would just slap another creature on top of it, and they kind of merged together into one thing, and they kept getting bigger and crazier. And that had a very, like, it was just humans versus these giant monsters that were out to eat all the humans. And every card, like, just oozed that flavor. Like, either you were a creature that was going to destroy the planet, or you were humans that were just barely scraping by that had unique abilities that you'd have to leverage in order to beat the monsters. But, like, every card reinforced that idea.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good example. So was the question you're going to ask which is better, a set that's top down or a set that's bottom up?
No, I was going to ask which you prefer, because there is no better. There's just which one would you buy?
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes... Oh, okay. Here's the thing. I did some research on this, and I found an article about the whole concept by Magic designer Ken Nagle, and he said bottom up is how the majority of Magic cards begin. And he talked about top down and bottom up from the concept of not the entire set, but of an individual card. And when you talk about an individual card, there's so many bottom up things that have to happen. You have to have the right ratios of the 5 colors. You have to have the right ratios of mythic, rare uncommon and common. You have to have the right ratios of the card types and stuff so that what you produce is a coherent game that is fun to play. Because if all you did was say, hey, I need more vampires, I need more werewolves, that kind of stuff, and you let that drive all of your decisions, the end game wouldn't be fun to play. It would have big gaps, it would have problems, it would be mechanically a mess.
Yeah, so regardless of the overall design aesthetic, whether it's bottom up or top down, there's still going to be quotas. Like, we've still got to fill out this blackboard and check off every one of these boxes in order to make this a functional set first.
Right. So ultimately, you have creative people that are coming up with a story, and you have mechanical people that are saying we need more red cards or we need more lands or whatever. And at the end, you arrive somewhere in the middle, and hopefully you have a good set. And for the most part, it works out.
And then you have this pool of wonderful artists that put the pictures on the cards that everybody gets to see. And we memorize everything about the card based on the picture. It's crazy how easy that is to do.
Yeah. It's a good game. Check it out, people.
If you haven't played Magic the Gathering, I don't know why you're listening to this podcast, honestly.
You too can be bad at Magic.
Yes. Go get a starter pack. They're $10 at Walmart. You can be terrible at the game, just like me and Ben.
All right, last time you and I had a little interaction, when I listened to it as I was editing the podcast, I went and looked it up on the internet, and I realized that you and your wife had acted out a scene from a movie that we'd all seen, and I think you didn't realize that you'd done it. But when I watched it, what you did was so close that I think you unconsciously reenacted a scene from a movie. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
I didn't until I saw the show notes. I had to click it because I had no idea what you were talking about. And I went to the link. And then as soon as I saw the first frame of the video, I'm like, this is exactly what happened.
Yeah. Not just a little bit what happened. It's exactly what happened. And I'm wondering if you and Nichole unconsciously were being, who was it, Raphael and Michelangelo from the first Ninja Turtles movie?
Yeah, from the terrible movie that was the Ninja Turtles. Yeah, and they were sitting watching TV and Michelangelo was obnoxiously eating popcorn. And then Raphael passive-aggressively, could you chew that any louder, please? And then he turned his head to him and did. Because that's what you do in that situation. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if we were reenacting that scenario or if it's just so indoctrinated in our culture that if somebody asked you to do something, the first response is to do it even worse.
Yeah, it's just such a fundamentally baseline reaction that, of course, that's how it played out. I thought I was having this great insight into you guys, but I think I was also replaying this scene in my mind. Anyway, I'll put a link in the show notes if you want to watch Josh and Nichole dressed in turtle suits enjoying some popcorn.
I'm Raphael in this scenario.
And Nicole's Michelangelo. Okay, that makes me wonder something. When you were a kid and you played Ninja Turtles, which Ninja Turtle were you?
Donatello.
Me too.
We're such nerds.
I was totally Donatello.
Oh, man. Now I feel bad. We're both Donatellos. Hey, that's one of those personality matrices. I've seen that on the internet. There's a handful of these like groups that are in pop culture that exist, and you can boil anybody in any group into one of those categories. And the Ninja Turtles are one of those groups where they capture the entire demographic of personality types.
All right, I'm gonna put a poll up on the subreddit, folks. So go on the reddit.com/r/bad@magic and weigh in on which Ninja Turtle you are and why.
I think it's weird because our podcast, we're super Donatello, but we talk about stuff that's very. I talk about stuff that's very Raphael. You talk about stuff that's very Michelangelo
and Leonardo sometimes,
and we blend into Leonardo. Like, it's weird. Like we the whole Ninja Turtle spectrum right here.
Awesome. So I'm kind of lonely, Josh, because my wife just came and visited me for 5 days and she went back home, and it was nice having her around.
I'm going to do my best to ask only PG questions about your wife's visit. So, starting with how
magical.
How like PG, Ben, PG. Like how would you describe your visit?
So I kind of had this longing for her to come down here, and I had this scenario in my head if she'll come down here and I'll take her to like the bay where I watch the sunset, or we'll go walk on the beach together, or we'll go to Disney World and we'll go to Star Wars Galaxy's Edge and geek out together. And you know what? As cool as it was in my head, it was even freaking better in real life.
That never happens.
All that stuff happened and more. Everything went perfectly. We just adored each other and had a wonderful time, and it was fantastic. I love that woman so much.
Oh,
I'm so sad she's gone. But she's taking care of our kids at home, and I had to let her go. So
you've only got like a month left, don't you?
Yeah. No, it's like 9 weeks.
Oh, a little over 2 months.
But while I'm watching the map, I don't know if you've seen the weather map of the United States, where like the entire country is blue and Texas is freezing over like Hades, and meanwhile Florida is still 70 degrees and sunny. It's just nice here.
Yeah, no, it's been glorious here in Arizona. Like we get 2 months of nice weather, and the rest of the time you just go outside.
Yeah, I hope I leave as soon as it starts to get bad here, but it hasn't yet. Today I went out and I rollerbladed for a couple hours, and I did some disc golf practice, and it was just like 65 degrees and sunny. It was beautiful.
Very good.
So I want to talk about Star Wars Galaxy's Edge for a minute, because that was my first time seeing it. I was going to go by myself if I couldn't find somebody to go with me, but luckily my wife came and she loves Star Wars too, so we went there. And if you remember what I said when we talked about Star Wars, that as much as Disney's confused about the fact that they think we want more information about the Skywalker family, the real star of Star Wars is the universe.
Yeah, just we all just want to live there. We just want to be in Star Wars.
So when we last went to Disney World, they had started construction on this area of the park. I was there in 2017, I think, and there was a closed area of Disney's Hollywood Studios in Disney World that was closed down, and it was like coming soon, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. So I had already ticked off that at some point in the future. So it opened last year, or in 2019, and Alicia and I went, and they make it so that you have to go through a tunnel to get into it. So it's literally like going into another world. It's not just like going from one themed area of the park to another themed area. And it looks and feels like you have stepped into the Star Wars universe. It's glorious.
So I'm assuming there's trash all over, robots randomly running around knocking people down.
Yeah, kinda. Like they've made an effort to make things look a bit rusty and beat up, and there's stormtroopers wandering around, and it had the feel of that they were there to enforce order, not just provide ambiance.
Oh yeah? How does the stormtrooper like enforce order on a random crowd of park goers?
They're just there in a way that feels vaguely menacing. Like they travel around in pairs and they stand above and kind of heckle you in a way that feels like they could cause some trouble if you provoke them.
Oh, I'm sure they get provoked all the time.
Oh, it was great. They were really good at being in character. So there was 2 main rides in that part of the park. One was called Rise of the Resistance, and the other was called Smuggler's Run. And apparently Rise of the Resistance has a long enough queue factor, and it's so problematic that they completely transitioned it to virtual queuing. And I utterly failed at the virtual queuing process and was unable to get into it. So that was really disappointing.
Oh,
but we did get into Smuggler's Run, where you get to go into a functional cockpit of the Millennium Falcon and have an adventure. And they've created this thing, realized it so completely that while you have 6 people in this cockpit, you have 2 pilots, 2 gunners, and 2 engineers. The way that you interact with your portion of the console that's feeding you information and demanding input sets the course of the story that's happening on the 3D screen around you. It was awesome.
Very cool. So pass-fail kind of criteria for each person, and then that branching storylines based on that.
Yeah, but you knock the antenna off the top of the Millennium Falcon, but you're going to successfully reach the end one way or the other. You're not going to like blow up. It's not that kind of experience.
Oh, you see, Disney, you're backing off of a golden opportunity here. They should have a fail state where if you're not good enough, like something terrible happens and you should feel bad getting off the ride.
I could tell, like there was one lady in front of me that was just kind of watching the screen, didn't realize she was supposed to be doing something, and it was demanding input from her, and I could see it was affecting the story. And I'd be like, Judy, get your freaking act together and get on those hydro boosters.
Were you yelling at Judy?
I wanted to so bad.
Oh, but you didn't.
No,
see, I'd have knocked Judy down.
We had our masks on, and we had plastic COVID screens between all of us, and it just felt like I would be intruding too much.
You see, I'd have knocked Judy out of her seat. Like, you're going to kill everybody, Judy.
So they had the landscape to a T. The architecture just was spot on. I mean, like you go through this bizarre marketplace that feels vaguely Middle Eastern, but also very foreign, with things draped back and cross and cloths, and there were characters around, and there was, I didn't realize this, but I looked it up later. They had a custom John Williams symphonic suite that wasn't in any of the movies that was playing for ambience in this area.
Man, must be nice to get paid to make music.
Whew. There's of course, like if you go to the Harry Potter world, you can buy butterbeer. They had like carts where you could buy blue or green milk.
I feel like blue milk would be the last thing you want to drink on a hot summer afternoon at a theme park.
I don't know what it actually tasted like. Alicia refused to buy any, but I would have given it a try. I don't know if it was actually milk.
Oh, I don't care if it was actually milk. Like room temperature, sitting on that cart all day with blue food coloring. I'd have chugged half a gallon of it.
I think they dispensed it from this giant rubber dinosaur-looking thing. I don't know.
Oh, don't drink it fresh. That's just gross.
So they had, at the vendor carts, they even had, I don't know, somehow like custom bottled bottles of like Diet Coke and Sprite that were in these round bottles with like tops that looked like a little tiny BB-8 droid. But it didn't look like BB-8. It just looked like a Sprite bottle, except it was completely spherical. That's
impractical for a container. How could you set it down?
Well, it was this. Yeah, you couldn't. It was the size of a. It was roughly the size of a 12-ounce can, but because of the geometry of a sphere, it was like 16 ounces.
Ooh, all right. So this is something you may not know about me, Ben. I am a firm believer that 16 ounces is the perfect amount of fluid to consume as a serving size.
I did not know that about you. Awesome.
I have narrowed this down. Like a one can of soda, and like you finish it, you're always like trying to get the last couple drops. Like it's just not quite enough. But when you go to the convenience store and you get a 20 ouncer and you're drinking it, you get to that last inch at the bottom and it's just like, I'm already done with this.
Too much?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, then you need these spherical bottles that are impractical for setting down.
Well, honestly, that might be a deliberate decision on Disney's part. How can you have litter or trash sitting anywhere when you can't set your drink down? You just have to throw it in the trash.
Okay, I want to make one more point about my foray into Star Wars universe last week. And that was, right now in the Star Wars universe, Grogu is king.
For merchandising?
Holy crap.
I'm sure you saw, it had to be tens of thousands of Grogus that day.
But this wasn't just Disney trying to hawk Grogu on us. This was all of the people that, when they got dressed that morning before they came to the park, had and were wearing and carrying Grogu. He is king right now.
I have a theory about why that is. I think Grogu is king because he never talks.
He can be whatever you want him to be.
He's the perfect blank slate. You automatically, by default, insert the most desirable traits into this little thing that you want in a character.
Yeah. All right, there's one other kind of like wrap-up thing I want to talk about from last time. And when I listen to it, I realize that there's an opinion I have that can come across to people as kind of harsh because I break a social taboo. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't, but please continue.
There are certain groups of people that we have given like a free pass to in society because we consider them protected groups. For instance, the military, or healthcare workers, or to a lesser extent, not so much lately, law enforcement officers. And along those lines, but not so much in the public eye lately, is school teachers.
Okay.
It's considered to be a noble profession. And when we speak of them, we talk about all the sacrifices they make and stuff like that. But kind of like how you mentioned the movie about waiters in a restaurant and all the terrible things that are happening behind the scenes. I forget what you called that one.
The movie's called Waiting.
Waiting. Yeah, I went and watched the trailer for it and realized I do not want to watch that movie.
It will change how you eat at restaurants for the rest of your life.
I do like Ryan Reynolds, and I definitely subscribe to the theory of never send your food back so that they're going to bring it out to you again because terrible things are going to happen.
Yes.
But so school teachers. So sometimes I say disparaging things about school teachers as individuals and as a profession, not because I disrespect that line of work, but having been a school teacher for a couple of years, the sheen is off. Like I refuse any longer to view them as this noble profession. And there's also this counterculture of like those that can't teach. You've heard that phrase before, I'm sure.
Everybody's heard that phrase, yes.
Yeah, and you know, that's not adequate to capture the totality of the situation. So my first day, I think it was my first day. If it wasn't my first day, it was my first week as a school teacher in Las Vegas in middle school. I had a friend there that was like, hey man, you know, at lunch, here's the teacher's lounge, come on down. So I went down to the teacher's lounge, and it so happened to be the health teacher's birthday. And the health teacher in middle school is the one who gives the kids their first exposure to human reproduction.
The birds and the bees.
And so they turned her birthday into an opportunity to do what I think people would be ashamed to do in like a bachelorette party in the teacher's lounge at the school.
So they had all of the novelty cakes and balloons and things.
Yes. I remember I walked into the room and there was a giant vibrating, veiny dildo on the table shaking and everyone laughing. and I was... You know, all of my ideas about the teacher's lounge were kind of somewhere between a lot of depictions of it in media where it's like just tired teachers trying to get some lunch in between their experiences with the kids. But this was like, it felt like walking into a frat party.
So your first experience, like you were expecting to walk in there and meet like maybe some downtrodden and tired but professional people.
Yes.
And what you saw was a bunch of recent college grads having fun while they could.
Yes.
Shocking. Yes. I am color me surprised that mid-20s, early 30s style people are going to not be so reserved.
I got it, but we've established, and it's well documented on this podcast, that I very much look at the world through rose-colored glasses, and I went in there expecting something a little bit more uplifting than that.
Oh, this is okay. We differ on this point because if I would be expecting in the teacher's lounge, like what you were talking about, some kind of sad, lonely people eating their lunch and just having to trudge back to deal with middle schoolers, the worst age of people on the planet. And instead, you found a lively bunch of people that were comfortable enough with each other and had such good morale and camaraderie that they could joke in an adult and unprofessional way in a setting like this. That's wonderful. This is my people. That's what you should walk in there with open arms, man.
Comedian Gabriel Iglesias has a show on Netflix called Mr. Iglesias. Have you ever watched it?
Mm-mm.
It's good. I like the first season. I haven't finished the second season yet, but he is a high school history teacher. And as of course, in any sitcom about teachers, one of the sets that they have where you go and you know when you're not interacting with the student is the teacher's lounge. And it's much more like this idea of just humans trying to get by, but having camaraderie and a good time in a way that's very decidedly adult.
Okay. That makes sense.
So that's fine. I reset my expectation for that. But then over the next couple of years of being a school teacher, I also saw things. For instance, in the classroom next to me was a special ed teacher. And special ed teachers are like the most protected of all teachers who are already protected of the noble profession. But what I saw was just a tired old lady that wasn't very good at her job. Like when I first got there, she was always there before me in the morning. She was always still there when I left in the afternoon. And if I ever came in on a weekend, she was there, just toiling away. And I thought, wow, what a dedicated person. How hardworking she is. Until I actually saw her teach, and she just sucks. And she's there all the time because she's making up for the fact that she sucks.
Are you sure that she didn't live there, Ben? Was she homeless and you just didn't take the time to get to know her well enough?
I know the kids have this thing where they think that their teacher lives at the school, but Josh, I hate to break it to you, but they don't actually live at the school. Anyway, I also, okay, here's a joke I heard in the teacher's lounge. What are the top 3 reasons to be a teacher?
The pay, the food, and the kids, right?
June, July, and August.
Ah! The 3 months you get off. That's hilarious. Because for some reason, in 2021, we're still an agrarian society where the children are needed for the harvest.
Yeah. So I made some friends back then I'm still in touch with to this day. I have a much more grounded in reality understanding and appreciation for what it takes and means to be a school teacher. I have some stories to tell that maybe I'll save for another time. But if you ever hear me say something disparaging about teachers that doesn't sound like it conforms with the usual societal taboo of treating teaching like it's this protected, noble profession, it's because I know that it's not.
I love how every one of your stories ends with, and I made some great friends that I still talk to this day. You must have like 700 people that you talk to. How many podcasts do you have, Ben?
Next time you and I go to Vegas together, I'll introduce you to a few of my teacher friends.
Oh, jeez. Please don't. You already introduced me to like 3 new people every time we go to Vegas. Like, how did you even have time to meet these people? Whatever.
Yeah. I think it's time for Bad at English.
Okay. We are perpetually bad at things, English being one of them.
Yeah, so I hope that we're making some progress over time in the show here, because it's interesting to talk about the differences between the culture of the United Kingdom and the United States, and maybe it helps you a little bit, like you said, if you're watching a BBC television show and you understand what someone says. But I also think our exposure to language could really broaden your mind. And next time I think you and I will introduce a new segment to the show, similar to this one, that will help expand our vocabulary and the way that we analyze the world around us. I'm looking forward to that one. Teaser for next time. Mm-hmm. For today's Bad English word, I want to talk about a word that they use utterly and entirely in place of something that we use, and they're non-overlapping, and that is washing up.
What are they washing?
The dishes.
But you can wash up anything. You can go wash up your hands. You can wash up the trunk.
But when the British say washing up, they mean the dishes.
Oh, so instead of doing the dishes, they're washing up.
They do the washing up.
They do.
Or it's time for the washing up.
The washing up is a proper noun. This is a
yes.
Oh, so there's a the in front of it. The washing up.
Yes.
I don't like that.
And if we have liquid soap that we use for washing the dishes, we call it dish soap. The British call it washing up liquid.
Oh, that's just ridiculous.
Yeah, if you look at it in the store, it's labeled washing up liquid. I'll put a little photo in the photo album of washing up liquid.
Have you read 1984?
No, the only Orwell novel I've read is Animal Farm, and I didn't enjoy it enough that I'm willing to read 1984.
I would encourage you to read 1984. Not for the plot. The plot is terrible. But there's a handful of interesting ideas that he has in there. And one of the things that, I forget most of that book, but one thing that I will never forget, Ben, is that as one of the tools that they were trying to do to control and restrict freedom of thought is they were deconstructing the English language and removing words. And this guy worked in a department of some government agency, and he was just so excited about his job. He's like, we realized that we can just use prefixes or prefixes or however you pronounce that in front of words, and we can eliminate so many words. For example, did you know there's like X number of thousands of words that just mean bad? We can get rid of all of those and just have bad. Not only that, but we can get rid of the word bad because bad is just ungood. So you have ungood that covers thousands and thousands of words. And then if you need all of these modifiers that go in front of it, you don't need those because you just have plus. We can do plus ungood. And if you need to really emphasize, you can do double plus. Double plus ungood.
I see why that stuck with you. It's a very memorable concept that you would talk about in a book that wouldn't actually work in real life. That's trying to turn English into French, because French has a committee that approves all new words, and it restricts the growth and morphing of their language. And English, on the other hand, adopts words from other cultures and languages and grows and morphs and changes. And it's why it's becoming, a world language.
Well, the reason I brought this...
That and the British conquered the world in the late 18th century. All of history derives from other things in history, and we're not going down that rabbit hole.
I brought that up as a concept of this is the opposite of what's happening. In the book, they were trying to take huge amounts of words and boil them down to just the meanings and being very efficient with language. This is the freaking opposite with the washing up liquid. That's ridiculous.
But even if you look at one of those maps of what do people call a fizzy drink in different parts of the United States?
What do you call a fizzy drink, Ben?
I usually call it soda. Okay. What do you call it?
I call it soda as well. Where in Florida, what do they call it? Are you in one of those states where, like, if you order a Coke, they ask you what kind?
Yeah, it's kind of like that. I think that's Georgia where that happens, but I don't know. It's a soft drink, pop, all those different words. I listened to an interesting podcast this week where a magician was talking about how magic used to have regional flavors to it. Like, for instance, if you watch someone shuffle a deck of cards in France or Italy or Japan, it had a very different feel to it. But now that magic has gone from books and clubs to being on the internet, it's becoming homogenous and it's losing its regional feel. So I think we should be grateful for the fact that the British call it washing up and we call it doing the dishes.
No. Objection. I want to live in the utopian future where everybody speaks the same homogenous, weird mix of language and we have the same words for everything and everybody knows what everybody else is talking about and there's no communication issues that cause conflict. Let's just skip that whole part where we have a war with the British again because we call it the dishes and they call it the washing up and we call it the bathroom and they call it the loo and we just can't handle it and we just fight again.
The first time you hear somebody call it something different, your brain goes, what was that? And you raise an eyebrow, and then you're like, oh, and then you translate it in your brain, and after a while you can just use them interchangeably without having to think of the other one. And it's a little bit charming and makes it feel kind of interesting to be in a different place.
So if
yes, let's do the washing up.
So that just sounds way too cheery. But if you're ever around a bunch of British people, do you start sliding into that British slang?
A little bit. And there's ones in my house that we use that I don't think we've gone back on. Like, for instance, calling a garbage can a bin.
Oh, the bin?
Yeah, we just called it that in my house now. It's permanent adoption.
I can get behind that because garbage can is a lot of syllables and bin is just the one. Like, what if you take out the trash? Is that emptying the bin?
Yeah, empty the bin.
Oh.
Or put in a new bin liner.
Okay, why liner? No, we're not. Can I call it a bin bag? Because that's way more fun to say.
Well, okay, there is one like that that's way fun. I don't think I may have used this on Bad at English before, but what we call a garbage truck, they call a bin lorry.
A bin, because a lorry is just like a car, right?
It means a semi truck.
Oh, a lorry is that's a very not to be sexist, but it sounds like a very feminine word for a very large truck. A lorry.
But it's two completely interchangeable words: garbage truck, bin lorry. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Because a lorry is just a truck, and the garbage is just the bin. So it's the bin lorry.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. I can see how that's fun to say a different word for the garbage truck.
I like it.
But if we were on the street and we saw a garbage truck in England, and we said, "Oh, look, it's a bin lorry," and we both start giggling like idiots, every British person in earshot is going to be like, "What are they giggling about?"
Oh, look, a bin lorry. Well, if you said garbage truck, they would raise an eyebrow, but then they would do the same thing. They would recognize what it means in their head and translate it and be like, oh, how quaint. The Yanks changed the word.
I feel like the garbage truck seems like adds more gravitas than bin lorry. I feel like a garbage truck is a much more serious thing than a bin lorry.
And probably because they're bigger in America.
Everything's bigger in America.
Well, last time you and I were talking about the jobs that we've had throughout our lives, and we ran out of time.
Excuse me. Time out, sir. Like, you talked about the jobs you had in your life. I talked about the one job that I had, and then we went back to all of the crazy adventures of Ben Rich.
Okay, so I owe the audience and you an apology because I realized that I selected a topic that was a little too lopsided and made you just turn into color commentary on my life.
What I think was really funny is you didn't think it was lopsided. It's like your baseline assumption was that, every person on the planet had 6 jobs before they went to high school, right? That's just the thing.
Kind of.
It just speaks to who you are as a person, Ben. No, normal people aren't like that.
All right. Well, I'm going to do some catch up on a few I missed. So I'm going to call this the speed round. I don't have a lot to say about these. I'm just going to rattle them off. The only criteria for being on this list is that I collected actual pay for doing this.
I will agree to this if I get to say one snarky comment to each one of these.
Okay. Electronics factory technician.
Sounds like you were replaced by a robot.
Cable billing tech.
Oh, sounds like you were replaced with a bad robot.
Yeah, I remember a traumatic discussion you've had with cable tech support. Pub kitchen assistant.
They fired you when you turned 12.
Industrial carpet cleaner.
You enjoyed it too much and it was weird and awkward.
Drywall installer.
You're too short.
Hurricane cleanup day laborer.
You were too damn cheery for something that's so sad.
Distribution warehouse operations.
Nobody knows what that job is anyway. You probably made it up and convinced them to give you a paycheck for it.
Roofing installer.
People actually need those. Again, you're very short. You probably, I don't know. I don't even know what happened there. Go ahead.
Black market auto parts dealer.
All right, you talked about that one at length, and that was easily the coolest job that you've ever had.
That is pretty much the coolest job I've ever had. Paint kiosk installer.
What is a paint kiosk, and who installs them? Of course, Ben Rich has done it. Go ahead.
IT upgrade installer.
Isn't that what you do now? Isn't that what you do for your kids? Isn't that what you do for your parents? Like, anybody that knows what computers are does this job. All right, go on.
Okay. And licensed New Jersey liquor importer.
I added this one to the list because
thanks.
Let us never forget that Ben is a licensed liquor importer in the state of New Jersey for reasons unknown.
All right. I want to talk about those two IT ones because if you remember what I said when I was in Las Vegas and I was getting ready to start as a school teacher, I didn't want to be a school teacher. I was trying to get an IT job. Well, I ended up on this list of like people with enough IT skill to be dangerous, but not to hire full time. And so after I got hired as a school teacher, every now and then I get calls from like these temp agencies that says, hey, in the middle of the night, we're going to go into this company and we're going to upgrade 100 computers. We're going to open them up, install new RAM chips, and upgrade the operating system. We need 10 guys to come down and do this.
This is another excellent illustration of the difference between you and me, because if somebody called me and asked me that, not only would I tell them never to call me again, I would probably threaten their life.
So I was like, that sounds freaking awesome.
Of course.
So I went down to some company in the middle of the night. It was the same thing with the paint kiosk. You know, at Home Depot, you don't realize this, but if somebody wants to go in and like get the perfect paint color to match something at home, they'll bring in a little scrap of whatever it is and they'll stick it in a machine that has a really accurate color scanner and it will spit out the exact chemical formula of the paint they need to have the guy mix up and bring home with them. Well, behind that kiosk is a computer, and sometimes they need upgrading or replacing, and I did that once at a Home Depot.
I've seen behind the curtain a little bit on those because I go to those paint places and I see, and I can't help but like lean over and look at the thing they're sticking the paint thing into, and they're always running like Windows 95 or something.
Exactly. That's what I did.
Here's the thing with those, Ben. Like, you can have the world's most accurate color scanner like for days, and it can spit out like to the micron the amount of paint that you need. What is the standard deviation or the error rate of those 40-year-old nozzles that are spitting the colors actually into the
can? Yeah, good question.
It's like, oh, you need exactly 16.3 ounces. It's like, oh, well, this will get within about 5. It's like, oh, yeah. So it could be green or it could be purple. Just depends on how well the nozzles work today.
There must be an economics term for the phenomenon you just described. It's where you have a bottleneck in a process that's the lowest common denominator. Like, yeah, just like I said with measuring somebody's temperature when they have a fever. Yeah, we could multiply it by 1,000, but if the thermometer is only accurate to 1 decimal place, it doesn't make a difference.
Yeah, you could have the world's most accurate color scanner. Your 40-year-old paint nozzles ain't going to be able to spit it out in the precise enough quantities to get that shade of ochre that you're looking for.
Yeah. Have you had that problem where you go and get color match and bring the paint home and it doesn't match?
Oh, no. We have super generic colors. We have, like, our walls are painted tan.
Eggshell.
No, eggshell. Get out of here. No, tan. It's like, it's fine. I'm sure there's some deviations from one room to the next, but you can't tell because it's tan.
Yeah. Okay. So when we ended last time, we stopped right about the time when you and I's lives started to diverge. I think we need to talk some point about your marriage. That would be a really interesting episode. I'm putting that on my interview request list.
Which part? The part where we got married twice, or the part where I had to change flights 3 times in order to get married, or the part that we got married in a foreign country but not really?
Yes. So right about the year 2008, I think you and I were both getting towards the end of our time there. I think you changed to a completely different unit, and I left the base. And we, of course, saw each other every couple of years after that, but that was the last time we've lived in the same geographic location. So that's about where I edited to and cut off some of what we talked about last time. So let's pick up from there.
Okay.
So in the year 2008, I left the 1st Communications Squadron at Langley Air Force Base and moved to Headquarters Air Force Space Command in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And I was in the branch that does top-level sustainment for all of the communication systems associated with the nuclear missiles, the Minuteman-III nuclear missiles, in all of the northern tiers of the United States, Wyoming, North Dakota, and Montana.
My favorite part about that job, the job that you just described, is that people have no idea what that actually entails, because in a Michael Bay movie or any Hollywood rendition of the nuclear communication system, it's ultra high-tech, super amazing, and just the cutting edge of technology. When in reality, it's got to be the oldest, most cobbled-together, duct tape-filled POS that anybody's ever seen before.
Your imagination astounds me sometimes, Josh. You nailed it. That's exactly what it is. I remember, for instance, one thing I remember is that we had a room full of servers in Nebraska that were so old and antiquated that they were running like machine code Fortran from the 60s, and they looked like a computer mainframe out of the 60s. You put 8-inch floppy disks into them. I'll put a photo of me holding one of these 8-inch floppy disks. You put 8-inch floppy disks to them. You typed on a keyboard that looked like something out of a 1950s war movie, and then it spit out. It was older than your dot matrix printer you described last time. Out of these dot matrix printers that required ribbons that were so old and so out of manufacture that when one ran out of ink, you would send it in for depot maintenance to be re-inked.
So, wait, there was people whose job it was to put more ink into these cartridges that were no longer manufactured.
Yes.
These were civilians, or?
We had a depot, and that was one of their functions. And there was a guy that was so freaking old. He was like in his 80s, and we were paying him like ridiculous amounts of money to not retire because he was the only one that knew like the computing language for this stuff.
Oh, jeez. And that's the backbone of the American nuclear program.
Yes. So when you hear people talk about the president carrying the nuclear football, and you have this vague idea that he has some kind of thing that he can put in a code and that will create some kind of effect, I have a very detailed idea of what actually happens. You know, what's happening behind the scenes. If the National Command Authority generates an order that becomes what's called an emergency action message, it's very time sensitive, and the guys that do it have very strict timelines that they have to meet for executing all of the actions, for the two-person integrity associated with it, the redundant communication systems that ensure the accuracy and delivery of the message to the people that have to take the actions to launch nuclear weapons, whether it's out of an airborne bomber, a missile in the ground, or a submarine, to create the nuclear effect that is America's nuclear deterrence.
Well, as a bit of a tangent, the reason I'm able to have this imagination is because being in the Air Force long enough and the government long enough, I realize that the government does this thing where once they spend a ton of money to build a thing that works, they're going to keep that thing forever. Why should we spend more money on something that's just doing the same thing as the machine we've already got? And they've been using that justification for that box that's 80-something years old for decades on decades now.
Yes, and there's all kinds of stupid abuses that happen. Like, for instance, the government says, we don't need to buy more of these 8-inch floppy disks because we're going to modernize our system and replace them. And then 20 years later, they still haven't modernized the system. We had a contract to replace it with modern parts, and we couldn't do it. Like, they tried to install a CD-ROM drive, and they couldn't slow the CD-ROM drive down enough to talk to this thing, and it failed, and the contract failed to deliver. And they're like, crap. Well, now we need more 8-inch floppy disks, but all of them are out of business. And there's some smart guy who saw this train wreck coming, bought a pallet full of 8-inch floppy disks at a government surplus consignment for like pennies. Now he sells it back to the government for like tens of thousands of dollars.
That's glorious. Tens of thousands of dollars. The government got off cheap if he's the only one that had a pallet of 8-inch floppy disks.
Yeah, so that kind of thing was happening. But there's other weird things surrounding this. Like, for instance, even though we have a lot of nuclear weapons, we reached like a static maximum point, and the mission requirements surrounding that enterprise haven't really changed that much since the height of the Cold War, or they've diminished a little bit.
I would hope. Didn't we have enough nuclear weapons to like destroy the planet like 14 times or something? I would hope that we backed off of that a little bit.
Yes, but we have this isolated, protected infrastructure that, unlike every other thing in the world, hasn't really grown. It doesn't need to grow. All it needs to do is send a text message from the president to a guy in the hole in the ground in Montana telling him to launch a missile.
I hope that's a gross oversimplification of the steps that need to happen for that. But okay, go ahead.
Yes, it is a gross oversimplification. But it's still just a very minute amount of data, and it has some really weird characteristics surrounding it that resist modernization.
Okay.
For instance, if a nuclear weapon were to detonate and you wanted to assure that you could still communicate, there's going to be scintillation, there's going to be shock waves in the ground, there's going to be lots of physics problems happening, and modern infrastructure is really bad at overcoming all of that. But crappy old copper wires buried in the ground is just kind of can shrug it off.
They just work. Yeah, I get that. Like I've never been read into any of these programs, so I can conjecture at length about these without breaking any non-disclosure agreements with the government.
Yeah, go ahead.
So from what little I know about the physics of a nuclear explosion, one of the side effects is going to be electromagnetic pulse.
Yeah, that's one.
Which modern technology is incredibly susceptible to because of like just the engineering that goes into modern day microprocessors. They're just so small, it'll short out a bunch of circuits, and then most modern electronics will discontinue to work, at least for a short period of time after an EMP. But like you said, in big giant copper cables, it's going to cause a surge, and then after that, like it's just copper, so they're still there and doing their thing. Might blow some vacuum tubes, but you can...
Right, yeah. And if there was a shock that caused the wires kind of shake in the ground, if it was fiber optic, they're going to break and shatter into a million pieces. But if it's copper wires, they'll just flex a little bit and keep on ticking.
Right. And so, of course, there's probably redundant circuits everywhere for this stuff.
Not to mention redundant buried circuits, but also redundant satellite communications, airborne communications, radios, towers, all kinds of stuff, so that it's very, very assured of being able to continue regardless of what contingency we're talking about.
I just had this image of, like, you get the call. It's like, do it, launch. And then you just have, like, this old school panel of just, like, green or red lights. And each one's got like a label printed on it of like the different comm that it came over, like telephone, text message, satellite, airborne. And like they all either click green or red. And then if you get enough greens, like, okay, it's probably true.
So there's a Northrop Grumman video that's unclassified that's on YouTube that's a great illustration of this that I'll post in the show notes, and it'll give you a very good idea. You can see it looks a little bit modern but very antiquated. You'll get the idea. So there's one other thing I want to say about this job of being... So I was in the sustainment office where our job was to monitor the budget and the sustainment for this and make sure that the system was getting enough money to continue working. And we were always begging for more money and modernization and that kind of stuff. But this was not at all the favorite project of anyone in Washington.
I want to sum that up in like the idea of you were a closet of IT guys, and then your boss was just like, all right, nerds, make sure this stuff doesn't break. And they left you alone.
Yes, exactly. Even more so than you think, because at some point in the past, they took my shop and decided to put it under the logistics general instead of the communications general.
That's weird because that doesn't make any sense. That goes against every other structure
It has to do with what enlisted specialties were in charge of maintaining it.
I guess that makes sense.
Yeah. Anyway, so it was very much like that. They were logistics guys, not comm guys, so they couldn't even second guess me. It was great. I was company grade officer of the year.
Because you know how to turn your computer on. It's like, wow, this guy really knows his stuff.
Well, one thing that happened, and I teased this in the last episode, is this is one of those experiences in life where I got to use advanced mathematics. Ooh. I'm going to try to give this in the shortest possible version that I can that still gets the point across. So at one point, there was this conflict that happened where they were doing some construction on the sites and figured out that the right hand hadn't been talking to the left, and these towers that they were building at the command post sites were in the direct line of sight of some of the installed hardened ground-based antennas that needed to communicate with satellites in space.
Oh, so there was interference happening with the crosstalk and radio waves.
Yes. Basically, they couldn't attenuate around these towers that they're building. And then when they started to figure out that they were having trouble communicating with their satellites in space, they're like, do you think it has anything to do with the towers those guys are building over there? And we said, what towers? And thus began my math project. So here's what happened. When I found out that they were building, so there's a very redundant architecture where we have command sites that are spread all over the place so that if something bad happens to one of them, we can continue operating. Like if a nuclear missile hit somewhere, it couldn't prevent us from using all the rest of them.
Yeah, this is on the scale of like, oh, if Utah goes away, it's okay because we still got the place in Montana that's going to launch the missiles.
Yes, on a macro degree and a micro degree. Like, okay, we have these 100 missiles, and they're each controlled in groups of 10 by a single command post, but each of the 10 command posts can control all of the others if they need to. So at this one site, they had 10 sites, and they were building 10 towers, and each one of those sites is slightly different in that what its view of the satellites in geosynchronous orbit are.
So southern horizon.
Yes, the southern horizon from about 10 to 20 degrees. So imagine just like right before the sun sets, like right there in the sky.
Listeners, Ben's doing fun stuff with his hands like he's a fighter pilot. And it's really fun to watch, but you can't see it, so I'm sorry about that.
Okay, so imagine you're looking out at the southern sky, and invisibly out there 28,000 miles away from Earth are military satellites waiting for text messages from the president to send down to these guys. And now someone's building a tower in front of them. So the tower building has its own story associated with it, but suffice it to say that those were really important towers and still needed to get built, and there was a very expensive project behind building those towers. But they also needed to not disrupt the communications of the installed antennas on the ground.
I feel like you just need to put them on the other side of the building. Like you should have put the towers over there, guys.
Yeah, okay, but here's the thing. It's a $20 million project to build the towers, and there was contractors out there doing the labor, and as soon as they got high enough, they started to obstruct the view of the southern sky, and it started to be a big problem. So I went and I got satellite photos of every site where these were installed, and then I got the laydown from each of those sites of, if you're looking in the southern sky, where are the satellites in geosynchronous orbit that it has to communicate with. And then I got the exact geographic coordinates of the base of the antenna and the base of the tower. And without even going to these sites, I was able to calculate the exact distance between those 2 points to the, accurate to within a foot.
So you did trigonometry.
Well, okay, you're jumping ahead of me, but because you're very smart. So I knew the target height of the tower, and I knew the distance between the base of the tower and the location of the antenna. And then I had to be able to project a ray into space all the way out into geosynchronous orbit, 28,000 miles away from the Earth, with a great degree of accuracy so that I could sit in front of a general officer and say, General, you have to stop your $20 million project because you're going to block the view of this satellite in the constellation.
That's
so
cool.
I was sitting there looking at it, and I realized I had a triangle. I had the top of the tower, the base of the tower, and the base of the antenna, and I knew 2 of the sides of the triangle, but I needed to figure out the angle.
Oh, Pythagoras strikes again.
No, it wasn't. Well, yeah, it was a right triangle, but this was SOHCAHTOA. This was high school trigonometry. And I just had this light bulb moment, and I was like, this is it. This is the moment my math teacher had been telling me about. I need to know how to calculate the inverse tangent, so that I can know the angle of this triangle, and then I can project it onto my map of the southern sky, and I can create this graphic and sit down in front of a general officer and tell him that he can't build that tower there.
I'm gonna go ahead and speculate that you may be a fringe case, Ben. Like, not everybody has to deal with problems of that magnitude in their day-to-day life.
So I did it. I created the satellite view, I created the graphics, I created the slides, and I made this briefing that I was really proud of because I had to use geographic mapping software and trigonometry and all that kind of stuff. And please, Josh, I'd like you to tell our audience right now, are these the kinds of things that you're expected as a company grade officer to know how to do in the United States Air Force?
Oh, please, no. Company grade officers in the Air Force are expected to be able to do everything all the time forever. And if it's your job, well, you just grow these skills because that's your job. But that sounds like an amazing PowerPoint presentation that you could have gotten away with by standing in front of the general and be like, your antennas are blocking these other antennas, and you idiots should have called and done a site survey first, like you were supposed to.
No, I tried that the first time, and they said, how do you know that? And then I had to make the other one.
Who said, oh, that sounds like the response of the civilian in charge of the $20 million project. Like, I'm not doing anything wrong. You're doing something wrong.
Yeah, yeah. So, but when I went to them and I had done the math, literally the phrase "done the math." When I had done the math, I was a juggernaut.
I will say that if you're ever in an argument over who's wrong, and you have a multi-PowerPoint presentation slide with trigonometric functions on it, like, I don't care what the other guy has to say. Like, you're going to blow him out of the water.
Yeah, I was like that engineer on the movie, on Apollo 13 or Independence Day. I'm like, no, I've done the math. And I would show them my calculations, and their eyes would glaze over, and they would fall over like a domino.
That's funny. I'm imagining the scene in Armageddon where they had all the biggest, like, all the generals and the president and all the people in the war room, and then there's the one disinterested guy in the corner that starts talking, and everybody shuts up and realizes that's the guy they need to talk to. And that was Ben Rich in this instance.
So here's the thing. The point I was making about being a company grade officer is that I was doing a job that was supposed to be done by a civilian engineer that had been doing this for 30 years and was the engineering authority on the system. But somehow that guy got missed. I couldn't find him, and it fell on me to do this. And I did all the calculations. I created the briefing. I brought it to the general. He canceled the $20 million project. We sent it over to the engineering authority, and I thought they were going to check my work. No, they started inviting me to their meetings and having me give my brief to the engineers.
Yeah, because why were they going to pay somebody to redo your math? You already did it for them.
Yeah, so I got company grade officer of the year that year.
for doing high school math. I'm imagining the rainbow with the star at the end that says "the more you know," like flashing across our podcast.
Yeah. High school trigonometry, SOHCAHTOA, inverse tangent.
Man, I did.
So what were you doing in 2008 to 2010?
Oh, 2008 to 2010 was, 2008 I got back from deployment, and so I PCA'd. I don't even remember what that says.
Permanent change of assignment.
There you go. I didn't move bases. I moved places where I worked, and I went over to the 82nd Communications Squadron, which was an interesting unit that never should have existed. They had these functions that existed at the MAGCOM level that they didn't have anybody to do, so they created a bunch of people to do these jobs that shouldn't needed to be. It was a weird situation, but I ran the help desk for, they called it GCCS, the Geeks database. It was a
Global Command and Control.
Something. It was the database that logisticians use that, like, okay, I need a can of beans and I need to get it to these people. Where are all the cans of beans that are owned by the government on the planet at this exact moment so they can, like, actually look this crap up? So it was the It was the database that housed, like, every asset that the government owned so people could access and figure out how to move it around for the people that actually needed to use and consume this stuff. That was a really cool job because that database was like quintuple redundant and it had to maintain 5 nines uptime, like legitimately 5 nines, which is 10 minutes of downtime a year. And so it was just cool dealing with the engineers and the help desk problems. And so like 99% of the time it was people calling in to reset their password that they forgot. And then 1% of the time it was like mission critical, life altering problems. Like the world is going to crash and burn if we don't fix this.
So I was hoarding 8-inch floppy disks and re-inking typewriter ribbons, and you're dealing with 5 nines. You've got like modern servers, and you're doing tech refresh.
I also got company grade officer of the year in that job, and Ben, mine was a lot easier because I got there, and then I said, like, what do you guys spend all your time doing as the new guy, right? I'm the new guy in charge of this help desk. What do you spend all your time doing? Oh, well, most of our time is doing password resets. Why? Oh, because people got to call us on the phone. Why? Because it's secure. Why can't you email their passwords to them over the secret network? And then everybody went quiet for a minute. And then like I pushed and got that put in. And I had the numbers, Ben.
You eliminated 50 jobs.
Ben, I saved the government tens of thousands of dollars by like setting it up so like any other forgot my password system. And there was like people that got fired because we didn't need them to have their jobs anymore. Like, because I asked the one question, like, why can't we just do a forgot your password link like every other website on the planet Earth does?
The point you're not making here is that there's so many things like that in the military where people don't just do that one last step. Why are we doing this stupid thing? Because that's the way it's always been done. Well, that doesn't make any sense. We could do it this other way. Yeah, but we can't penetrate the bureaucracy enough to actually make the change. Okay, we'll just keep doing it the stupid old way.
Oh, I will say I did have to do some work to penetrate the bureaucracy. At one point, Ben, I swear to you, there was a 30-something-year-old woman who was the civilian in charge of security in our squadron in my office, door shut, weeping because of the changes that I was trying to force her office to make.
Like, she just was so adverse to change.
Not just so adverse to this change, but just like how audacious and outrageous I was to even presume to ask the question that they changed this process.
Wow.
So
I have nightmares about that kind of person.
Oh, I didn't care. Like, she was crying in front of me, and I was just confused. Like, why is this person crying about passwords?
But those kind of people are so obtrusive to progress that you almost have to wait for them to retire or die to actually affect real change.
I was still young enough at the time and idealist enough and dying on enough hills that, like, I'm going to beat her. Like, sitting in the office looking at her crying over this process, I'm like, I'm not crying over this. I'm going to win. Like, there's the emotional investment that we have in this is ridiculous. Like, she has no leg to stand on, and she knows it.
That's an important place you exist on the psychological spectrum. I think you and I read a book together that talked about this, where there was a doctor that was kind of insensitive to the horrors of being a doctor for a leukemia ward where there are a lot of children dying of cancer. And because of his insensitivity to that, he was able to really dig into the field and have some advances that were really helpful to children with cancer.
This leads great into my next topic, weirdly enough, and I'll make the connection here in a minute. But I was working those jobs at the 82nd, and then the email came out, and they didn't have enough drone pilots, and they were going to do a special volunteer-only program where they're going to check and see if they can take us run-of-the-mill, terrible, bottom-of-the-barrel support officers and see if the very best and brightest of us could manage to become the very worst of pilots.
Oh.
Which was incredibly insulting in the first place because having done both jobs, pilots have it way easier than any company-grade support officer on the planet.
So we did a whole episode on this.
Yeah, so I'm not going to go into detail about it, but one of the things that we had as part of the screening process to see if I was going to get selected, I had to go get a psych eval. And one of the questions that they asked, if you like, it was a hardcore whole thing. Like, it was really cool. And I had a one-on-one session with a psychologist for like an hour after all the testing, and he was just verifying the results of all the tests and then asking me some more questions and follow-up and things, stuff that a human needs to get out of you that a test can't. And he asked me that question that anybody that is in a position to employ weapons against other people is asked at some point: is how do you feel about
killing another person?
About killing another person? Could you kill another person if you were called to do that? And I honestly, I was completely honest with him. And I told him, like, I'm worried that giving you my honest answer is going to disqualify me from this program. And he said, and then, of course, he perks up.
He's probably imagining in his head that you're like a Jehovah's Witness or something.
Well, of course, like, this is the answer that perks him up. And, like, he sits up a little straighter with his clipboard and he gets his pen out. And he's like, oh, why do you say that? Like, well, to be completely honest, I don't have any intrinsic value for human life. And so if somebody dies and they're not like in my circle or sphere of influence, it doesn't really bother me. And it just got quiet for a couple of minutes. Turns out I was perfectly, that was like the perfect frame of mind for somebody in my job to have. Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding. Have I talked on this podcast before about the Minot Incident? I think I have.
Which one?
The Minot Incident happened, I think, in 2007. It was when they accidentally loaded a couple of live nuclear weapons and flew them across the country.
You've talked about it a little bit, but I don't know what aspect of it are you referring to now.
Okay, well, I'll give the aspect that's relevant to our discussion here. They loaded a couple of live nuclear weapons, the kind that are launched from airborne B-52s, air-launched cruise missiles.
The cool kind.
Yeah, on a B-52, and then they accidentally took off in the plane that was carrying them when it shouldn't have been transporting them. It wasn't planned. It wasn't coordinated, and flew from Minot, North Dakota to Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana, landed on the airfield. It was unattended for 18 hours before somebody came out and said, and some low-ranking airman came out and says, "Hey, wait a minute.
Why?
These are live nuclear weapons.
Why are there cruise missiles on the B-52?
And the rest is history, up to and including the firing of the 4-star General Chief of Staff of the Air Force.
Man, heads rolled for that.
So while heads were rolling for that, there was a huge change that happened to the Air Force, and that was that they said, okay, we need to make a symbolic and substantive change to our organization. And in the time I was in one of the targeted organizations.
Oh, this is when the pilots took over, like the nuclear missiles in the Space Command, isn't it?
Yes. So I was at Space Command, and they says, "Hey, all you guys at Space Command that do anything having to do with nuclear, we're gonna take all your jobs, and they're gonna move them to Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana. None of you ever want to go to Barksdale." And I went, "No, I never want to go to Barksdale."
Spoilers, everyone. Ben is going to Barksdale for his next and last assignment in the Air Force.
So
the irony is delicious.
At the time, I was protected by an Air Force regulation that says if you haven't yet lived at your current base for 2 years, you can't be moved to a new one.
That's nice.
So I was involved in all of the process for writing the paperwork and transitioning the jobs across. And any senior NCO or officer that thought they were going to end their career in Colorado Springs and now got informed they were going to have to move to Louisiana, put in their retirement papers. And there was this big loss of brain power that was happening. Anyway, after I made all the transition of sending my job down to Louisiana, and I went down there, so I've been there before, to help transition and stuff, I got back to Colorado Springs, and they didn't know what to do with me. I'd been there for 2 years. I've been doing this nuclear command and control stuff. They sent me back up to the 6th where I was working with other cyber guys, and they were like, go get me coffee.
Oh.
So I went to the functional manager. I'm like, look, man, there's got to be somewhere else on this base. There's all kinds of things happening at this base where I could do something. He's like, yeah, they actually need some guys over at the Network Operations Center that controls all of the regional backbone network that does our email and communications and stuff.
Dude, that's super awesome.
Yeah. So I did what you called the PCA earlier, a permanent change of assignment, and transferred over to the Network Operations Center. And I got there and started doing regional network operations. Same kind of thing you were doing at the 82nd, similar.
Now, for everybody that's listening, if you've never been in a Network Operations Center, it's one of those. If you imagine any movie where they show an operations center where they have rows of desks and big giant screens and walls and it's a really dark room and everybody is super intense, that is exactly how they build all the network operations centers. Not because it's functionally the best, but because we're a bunch of nerds that work in that building and we want it to be the coolest place to hang out. And so all the lights are always off. We have the biggest data walls. It's the coolest place to be.
You nailed it. It's exactly like that. So I got there and I was doing that for a while, and they says, "Hey, we need you to deploy to the Middle East." I want to focus on this deployment to the Middle East for a while. I don't remember where you were at the time, but the year was 2011, and they said the Army is shorthanded in their network operations center in Afghanistan, and we need an Air Force guy to go fill in a slot to be on the crew that runs the network in Afghanistan.
Cool.
So I went first to New Jersey in February and got trained on how to be part of an Army unit.
I was in New Jersey in February. That was the absolute worst training ever.
It was horrible. I freeze my butt off. It was inefficient.
It just reinforced that the Army is the bad choice. Don't go in the Army.
But it's like they do the required things in the worst way possible. So when I came away from it, I had all the stuff I needed to know, but I thought that should have taken 2 days instead of 2 months, but whatever.
Well, that's because you're an officer in the Air Force. You're not an Army grunt. There's a difference in scale and quantity we're talking about. If it's just you and your 4 people that are getting trained, yeah, you can probably do it in 2 days. But if you're processing 70 people, some of which may or may not have graduated high school, you've got to pander to the lowest common denominator.
It's logarithmic.
Yeah. So the larger the groups and the types of people that come through, they've got to change.
It stretches it out and it becomes more inefficient.
Yeah. And they didn't.
And we did everything you can imagine.
They didn't tailor it. They just put you through the same meat grinder they put everybody else through.
Yes, and that meat grinder is really inefficient in that whenever somebody somewhere says, "Hey, our guys didn't have this important thing they needed to know," they just threw it on the list. And they're not saying, well, what if you're a cyber guy and you're in an operations center and you never leave the base? No one asked that, because there were too many times where the cyber guy they thought was never going to leave the base ended up in a convoy, and he was the one driving, and he rolled his Humvee into a ditch and killed everyone on board or something like that.
When I was at that training, I remember we were in a specific scenario and we were asking the instructors, okay, if this happens, what do you do? Oh, you just call higher headquarters and they'll tell you what to do. Okay, but what if this happens? Oh, you just call higher headquarters. And we had to stop him. We like, Sergeant, look around. That guy's a captain. That guy's a major. These two are lieutenant colonels. I'm a captain. We are higher headquarters. You need to explain to us like what we're supposed to be doing here. And it turned out when he finally leveled with us, he had no idea, because he would just call on the radio to somebody that was higher ranked than him, and they would tell him what to do.
Yeah. So let me give a quick rundown, and you can back me up here. I mean, I learned how to load the cryptography into the radios in the tactical vehicles. I drove an MRAP.
That's cooler than I did.
We practiced shooting on a range that was way different than Air Force range. We were like out in the woods, and there were like pop-up targets that we would shoot. We did night shooting. We did moving shooting. We threw live grenades. We shot 50 calibers. I did a Humvee rollover simulator where they put you in all your battle rattle with your rifle, and they stick you inside this thing that's almost like a washing machine that's like a mock-up at the inside of a Humvee, and then they spin it around 4 or 5 times and then turn it off when you're like upside down, and then you have to figure out how to get out in a few seconds so you don't drown or whatever. Did you do that thing?
I did not do that thing. Like I was in like the first or second iteration of this, and it was the version I went through was like what you're talking about, but less planned.
Yeah. So in addition to all that, then there was all the classroom training. It was like how to be sensitive to the needs of the Afghan people, a little bit of how to speak Dari and Pashto, a bunch of stuff like that.
We didn't get any of the Pashto.
Yeah, and it was good. Like I felt like there were good ideas behind it. And from coming from an educational background, I feel like I could come to this and I could be jaded and I could just feel like I have to get through it and I could waste my time, or I could apply myself and try to figure out the good concepts they're learning and maybe get something useful out of it. So I always just approached my training with a good attitude and tried to learn what I could out of it. I had a lieutenant colonel while I was there. His name was J.D. Loftis. And he was part of what was called the AFPAC Hands program, where he was going to go and be in Afghanistan for a long time and deal directly with the people. And he was a cheerleader. Like, imagine me with rose-colored glasses on. I mean, his were like hot pink. He was... And whenever we'd be in a class and you would hear like some Army guys, this is like their 4th deployment or something like that, and they would start bad-mouthing the Afghans, he would stop everybody and be like, listen, you're part of the problem. If things are ever going to get better over there, every one of us need to have a good attitude about this. And he would teach us... He taught us how they just wanted to have peace and things were going to get better, and it was really good. 6 months later, he was shot in the head by his driver in Kabul and died.
Holy crap, that took a dark turn.
Yeah, and he's, I had another friend that died while I was in Afghanistan on that tour, and it just made me, I look back on moments like that where sometimes we talk about our time in the military like it's an episode of The Office, but this is the profession of arms, and we were carrying live rounds in our rifles. And
I mean, all right, if we were going to get dark for a second, yeah, I was in Afghanistan. I got mortared a handful of times. Our base was shot at few times. I had to respond and go man the walls or whatever. I have confirmed kills to my name. I have unconfirmed kills to my name. So yeah, I mean,
yeah, like you said, like I said, we talk about it like it's The Office, but it's still the profession of arms, and we break things and kill people as politics by other means.
I mean, yeah, but that's not but it's so much more entertaining to talk about the episodes of The Office that we had to sit through.
It was one of the cruel ironies of life that Colonel Loftis, that was the one that was betrayed by an insider from the Taliban, because he really, I felt like, had the best needs of the Afghan people at heart and was coming from the right place.
This is the thing, is we a lot of people went over there. I had the same kind of experiences you had with people. Like, there's a lot of like going over there and like, this is their country and we're here to help them get back up on their feet and do these things. And we're coming out with the wrong attitude, because I got there and I realized that people that live there, like, we're the invaders. Like, we can have whatever intentions that we want, but this is their country. They've been living their life. We have a different set of values. Yeah, maybe what they do doesn't line up and seems wrong to us, but they've been living it for who knows how long. And so any kind of disruption to their normal existence is seen as an intrusion, and those are usually unwanted.
Yeah, and I get how on a macro level they might just lump us in with the Russians or the British, 2 and 5 decades before us, but they could see the difference. They could see the difference in the Americans and the Russians.
Ben, I'm going to tell you a story that I experienced while I was there. And it was with the Afghanistan police department. All right, so there was 2 units that we worked with constantly. There was the Afghan army, which were legit dudes, like really putting themselves out there to try to make the world a better place. And then there was the Afghan police, which were local police stations that were the most corrupt and basically crime families that I've ever seen in my entire life.
Yeah.
And they were having...
And
go ahead.
You were part of a unit that was collecting like contraband weapons and destroying them?
So the base had 2 different functions. One of them was the outreach and the construction portion that would go out and they would like build infrastructure and things for the local villages. And the other one was general security. We're making sure that the Taliban don't uprise in this area. So there's an Army unit and an Air Force unit on the base, and I worked for the Army unit. But the police department that I'm referring, like all of the police departments were having such problems with corruption that they couldn't pay anybody at the police station because they were just sending all of the like monthly payroll to the police chief, and he was just keeping like 98% of it and dishing out the rest.
Holy crap.
And so they said, oh, okay, well, we'll solve this problem we'll travel out to each individual police station once a month, and then we'll hand their paycheck to them in cash, to each individual employee of the police station, each police officer. That didn't work because the police chief would stand outside of this trailer where they were handing over the cash and said, give me half of that or you're fired. And so most people will give most of their paycheck back to the police chief again. And so then they decided, what we'll do is we'll just give every police officer a bank account with the National Afghan Bank and give them a debit card, and they will direct deposit their pay and they can go get it that way. At the time, Ben, there were 3 ATMs in the entire country. And
yeah, such an American brilliant idea.
Yeah, that was a complete disaster. So the police department continued to be a crime family for the entire time that I was there.
Yeah. And I get why that could give you a feel of jadedness. So when I got to Afghanistan, I took a volunteer position teaching a Bible study class at the hospital once a week.
Because of course you did.
One of my students in my class was an Army veterinarian, and I had a few occasions to talk to him in great length.
I loved the Army vets until they came to our base and shut down our restaurant.
So here's the fascinating thing about having a friend that was an Army veterinarian is the Army is the only branch of the service that has veterinarians. And he was over there and he did like humanitarian stuff. Like they'd send him out when some farmer had like a sick cow or something like that, and he would help him out. And he was interacting directly, not with the police, not with the Army. He was interacting with the villagers. And when I would talk to him, it kind of gave me hope,
Yeah, I get that. I mean, not everybody is the crime family that's out there. I get what you're saying, but the fact of the matter is, like, we were inserting ourselves into a culture that we didn't understand.
Yeah, exactly. We were trying in the way that Americans try.
So we can feel better about ourselves when we came back. Look at all this good work we did. I hope they cared about it or gave a crap after we left.
Yeah. So my job there was to be in the Network Operations Center. We were monitoring all of the communication lines within and outside of theater in Afghanistan. We had some crazy problems, Josh.
We had the times that we got murdered on our base. Like, it wasn't really dangerous. It was the locals wanting to have a Saturday, like drinking on Saturday night. Like, hey, what should we do? Hey, let's spin up the Americans and see all the crazy crap that they do in the next 20 minutes.
Yeah. And we took indirect fire, I think, 17 times during my 6 months in Afghanistan. But I'll never forget one time I was on shift and we were near the airfield, and there was always planes taking off and landing. But one night I heard what just sounded like it was different. One of those nights when it just really feels and sounds different. But because we weren't in the tight community of the operators, we were only vaguely aware of what they were doing. We just made sure that their computers and phones and stuff were working. Well, right next to us was a special ops compound, and I heard what sounded like 40 helicopters taking off out of that compound.
That's cool.
And I was like, I was like, did you guys hear that? And like, yeah, what was going on? I don't know, something crazy out of Camp Alpha. So I was on a night shift. So I went home that night, and it happened like right at the end of my shift that I heard all those helicopters take out. I come in the next morning, and all over the TVs, Osama bin Laden is dead.
Oh, so you were there when they took off to go get him.
I was in Afghanistan when the special operators left, like 100 feet from where I was sitting, and got Osama bin Laden.
That's super cool.
Yeah. Like, so when I think back on that tour, when I think back on my uncle serving in Vietnam, I think of somebody who did like tours of duty in a war where he was fighting. And I know my kids don't think of it that way about me, but I did. I went to Afghanistan. I was shot at. I was, I carried a gun with bullets in it, and I took fire, and I hid in a bunker, and we freaking got Osama bin Laden. I fought in a war zone in a time of war.
That's cool. Did you get a ride in a helicopter?
Never.
I rode in helicopters, so I've still got that slight edge. My deployment was slightly cooler than yours.
Do you recommend it? I don't know if I want to.
So the helicopters were so cool because I was supposed to go to like one of the little tiny army base that I was at, and I asked somebody, how do I get there? Like, oh, you just go down to the airfield and ask them. So the Air Force runs logistics like a professional organization does. Like there's manifests and plans, and you can't just show up and get on a plane and expect to fly anywhere. That's not how this works. You need to be on the list, and we need to run it through the system or whatever. The Army runs helicopters like it's the subway. Like I went down to the airfield. I'm like, yeah, I'm supposed to go to this place. I'm like, oh, which color route do you need to be on? What are you talking about? And he's pointing at a map.
Oh, wow.
He pointed at a map, and they had a subway map that was just, yeah, we run this 3 times a day.
Just get on the next car.
Yeah, this ring, like get on the blue ring. The blue ring hits these bases in this order 3 times a day. They leave at this time, this time, and this time. And it was just, that's all it was. It was a subway of Chinook helicopters with Apache escorts. And I just jumped on one to get to where I was going. And it was super cool.
That does sound cool. But see, that's a good example of the different culture between the Army and the Air Force. And there's a reason those cultures are different. But sometimes it's better to be in the Army culture than it is in the Air Force culture.
Well, in the Air Force culture, like everything has to be planned. And if you're going from one country to another,
they give you the side eye and they'd be like, so, Captain, why do you want to get on a helicopter?
Right. But in the Army, they've got guys, there's thousands of Army guys in theater, and they've got to go all over the place all the time for a bunch of reasons. So they give up. It's like, does your boss know? Yes. Okay, fine. Get on the helicopter. We don't care. We're just running the ring route.
The Air Force wants you to turn in, a approval letter in triplicate.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm going to go down this tangent again, but another one of my favorite memories is we showed up at the staging base before we got to Afghanistan in some third world country somewhere. It was the middle of the night. We just got off of the commercial. This is where you transition from the commercial airliner onto the military airliners. And it was an Air Force run operation. This was mass moving of troops in and out of country on like C-17s. And I remember going into the logistics tent, and they like the guy giving the rundown. Okay, this unit, you guys, yes, you guys are going out at this time on this day. This unit, you guys are going out on this time this day. Air Force guys, you're going out this unit this day. Oh, Army guys, we're working on it. Maybe a week and a half, we'll let you know. Like that's exactly how it was. Are
you talking about Minot?
Yeah,
in
Kyrgyzstan. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And they like the Air Force were taking care of the Air Force guys, and they literally said, "Oh, Army guys, we'll figure it out."
Yeah, exactly. Cultural differences. All right, so let's talk about 2013 to present.
So 2013, that's when I got out of the Air Force.
Okay.
That was a big life transition for me.
So that was at about our 10-year point.
I was active duty at that point for 8 years. The 4 years at the academy, even though I was getting paid active duty pay, doesn't count for your active duty time.
I see.
So it's either 8 or 12 years, depending on how you count.
Got it.
I got out.
All right.
I got out because I finally realized that the Air Force was terrible.
So did you get out because you had another career all lined up and you were ready to go, or you got out because you needed to get out and you'd figure the rest out later?
The second one. Like I was still flying by the seat of my pants, Ben. It's fine. I was very narcissistic as a younger man, so I was like, I'm king of the world. Everyone's just gonna throw money at me. It's gonna be a wonderful experience. Funny, that didn't happen. So
you're making me nervous. This is one of my insecurities, but keep going.
You're gonna be fine because you do all the things that I don't do, and that is network and talk to people and make friends and know people that have jobs and want you to work with them for jobs. So it didn't matter how hard I beat that drum of like my last job was managing a $26 million budget and I had 40 people that worked for me. Nobody cared. Nobody cared because they can't translate the military experience to the civilian experience.
Yeah, it's a completely different world.
I don't know why, but that just is what it is. So that was a very humbling experience, finding a job. I eventually got a job at a GoDaddy sales position because I had the IT background.
That's like web hosting?
So I wish it was web hosting. No. So their entry level people go to the help desk which is ridiculous. Like if you know nothing about computers, but you know how to write emails, you're going to go to help people solve their computer problems, which is backwards to me, but it is what it is. The next tier up was, it was called the consulting department, but we were cold calling sales. We were cold calling people that had
sales of domain namespace licensing.
No, all the other products. Like domains were not our thing. Like we did all of the other products that GoDaddy has, like the hosting and the emails and the servers and the SSL certificates and all that junk. And I was very knowledgeable about computer stuff because at that point I had built my own website several times.
You were overqualified, weren't you?
I was super overqualified, Ben. I worked that job for 6 months, and it was a cold call sales job. I don't have cold calling sales skill sets. I might have said this on the podcast already. I set records for the number of returns I processed for. Oh, dude, I'm looking at your account, and the last guy screwed you. Like, you don't need 3 of these things because this product that you have here takes care of all that stuff. Let's get all this stuff.
Yeah, you did mention this. You were Bob Parr.
I was that guy. If I had no doubt in my mind, and my supervisor even said, like, if I had stayed there for like another 2 months, they'd have moved me up to like tier 2 help desk or to like the hosting department. Guys that actually knew about computers and were solving problems for customers that got much better pay, much fewer phone calls, and weren't reliant on sales commissions to make the salary that you were promised at the beginning. But being the impatient person that I was, like I decided, no, I'm going to strike out on my own. Like I hate this phone call thing. And I started a pool business because my dad's a pool guy. My brother's a pool guy. I did pools as a kid. I worked at a pool store. I knew pools backwards and forwards. I thought I learned a lot more after I started doing pools on my own. My dad was kind enough at first I part-timed for him, and then I had a small route that I purchased by liquidating my retirement fund. Pools are weird because like pool routes in Arizona, you can buy them like they're commodities. So
I'm sure that's true of any business like that.
Any service business, kind of. Like there's always, and then there's
sell your clientele.
Well, there's a ton of pool guys. Like 6 out of 10 houses in Arizona have pools, and pool guys are always looking to sell. Like imagine like you have a bunch of.
I love it when you talk pool facts.
Well, so everybody's trying to consolidate. Like, oh man, I have 115 pools, but I really only want to have 100. So I'm going to sell 15 of them for a profit for me. Which 15 are you going to sell, Ben? You're going to sell your worst.
The ones that are farthest away or that they're terrible customers?
Exactly. And so everybody's always selling those people off. So I'd pick up 5 here, 10 there, and eventually I built myself up. And then I'd get referrals because lo and behold.
How much does it cost to buy a customer?
Typically 10 months worth of what you would charge them for a pool.
Wow. So you have to work it for a year before you even break even?
Yes. So luckily I had my retirement fund that I liquidated as seed money to create the route to get the AR flowing in. So I cashed down this, I bought enough routes, and then I had a business and stable income, and that's what I did.
Wow. Okay, so I did not, remember I said when I did the speed round that my criteria was I've collected a paycheck for doing this thing. I did not add pool guy, whatever you call it, to my list because you never paid me.
Pool professional.
But I have worked a couple of days with you. Every time I come visit, I would go, we'd do your route for the day and go clean a bunch of pools. But you did give me a shirt, which I love. So I'll count that.
Well, I mean, to be fair, you weren't worth a paycheck at that point. Like you were slowing me down a lot of the time.
That's great.
The best part about being a pool guy was one, I could like after a couple of years of doing it, I was on autopilot and I could just listen to books all day in my headphones, which was really nice.
Yeah.
And the second part was waking up every morning and knowing I have a finite amount of work to do today. If it takes me 4 hours to get it done, or if it takes me 10 hours to get it done, as soon as it's done, I'm done. That was a nice feeling. Like not having to watch the clock or punch in or punch out was a really good feeling.
I liked hearing you talk about the engineering challenges of that job. You know, it wasn't just show up and scrub a pool and throw some chlorine tablets in. You were doing chemistry. You were doing, a wiring and plumbing and interesting things like that.
I was not every pool. This is why it sets apart a pool boy from a pool professional. Because if a customer asks me, hey, I want that thing where I can run my pool with my phone. I'm like, sure, I can do that. It's $3,000. And being able to know what equipment that I needed to purchase, how to install it, like not just like wire it up and then program it on the phone, but how do I actually take this box and bolt it to this concrete wall and then physically run the conduits to it to wire these components together.
Yeah.
I mean, you had to be a plumber, an electrician, and a chemist to be a pool professional.
But that's the thing about you, Josh, is you weren't content to just clean pools. You were going to be doing that extra engineering kind of stuff, and you went a little bit beyond that, didn't you?
So when I first started, I was my dad has been doing this forever. He would write things down on pieces of paper, and I will never forget as a kid, every time I got into his truck, there was little tiny scraps of paper everywhere, like stuck into the dashboard, like in piles on the passenger seat, because he's writing down all the notes of the things like, oh, I installed this extra part, or this person needs this, or I need to schedule and call this person for this. And there was no way to, like, that's just how he tracked things. Even to this day, he still just writes everything down on like a notebook that he has.
Did it work for him? I mean, even though it seemed chaotic and ugly, did he still, or did he forget things and miss stuff?
We'll never know. Like,
I love that answer. Move on.
Well, so me being the computer guy, immediately I thought like, oh, there's got to be a better way. And I have this, I just worked at GoDaddy, and before I left, the GoDaddy employee discount was 90%. So I bought a couple of domains and like some hosting for like $15, and I still have them for another 5 years before they expire.
Nice.
Yeah, it was
well done.
Yeah, it's awesome. So I threw up. I know how to code. I did this all through college.
Too bad you didn't buy some GameStop stock while you were at it.
Go there. But I remember, like when I was in college, I had to make the I had to make the database for our guild in World of Warcraft to track the dragon kill points that everybody had accrued as our in-guild currency for who got loot. And this was a direct translation of those skills, Ben. Like I built a website that would track the information that I needed day to day, week to week, month to month for my pool customers. And I built it for myself. And like as time went on, I would tinker with it. Like, you know what, it'd be convenient if it did this. And so I'd add some code and like, oh, now it does that. And then finally, like somebody...
But this was just for you,
this
right?
Was just,
you were just doing it just
this
for
was,
you.
I used it myself without even like showing it or talking to anybody for like a year. And then I showed my, like, how do you keep track of all this stuff? And like, oh, I built the website and I just access it on my phone. And I built it so it fits on my phone screen. And I just hit a couple buttons. They're like, what are you talking about? And I show it to them. Like, this is amazing. You could sell this. And I had the idea, like, you know what? There's a lot of pool guys in Arizona. I could probably sell this. And so I rebuilt it from the ground up with the intent as the design at the beginning, instead of just something I threw together to make it work. Like with the idea of, okay, if I'm going to make this modular and implementable and scalable, these are the steps that I need to take on the background to make it work and function properly.
Yeah.
And I did that.
That's hardcore software development stuff.
Which I took courses on software development when I was in college. And I tried to implement all of those, and eventually it just fell to pieces, and I just made it work like you always do. That's how software development goes. Yes. But it is a live product right now. If you are a pool guy that somehow found the Bad at Magic podcast, you can go to poolnotes.com, and it is still functioning. It's still up to date. I still maintain it. I have paying customers. It is, honestly, of all the competition I have seen out there, it is the only system that is built by a pool guy for pool guys. All the other systems that exist for this niche are software developers trying to solve a problem for a pool guy. And it's overly complicated, it is slow, and it's hard to use. This thing is built like it's hot. I want to get done and go home. And so when I'm on my phone, it gives you this interface. And when you're back at your desk at home, it gives you a different interface with all of the actual billing and the hardcore tools and stuff that you would need.
This is awesome. I can't believe it took us 40 episodes to utilize our podcast to advertise for your software development business.
Poolnotes.com.
This episode of the Bad at Magic podcast brought to you by poolnotes.com.
I think I have 4 paying customers right now. And it's enough to, one, cover costs, and two, I get to upgrade my personal computer every once in a while by transferring funds over.
And claim it as a business expense.
And this is the thing. Like, I kind of feel like it's a freebie because Nicole's like, what is this $200 charge for computer parts? Oh, if you'll notice, sweetheart, on that same day, there's a $200 deposit from a different bank account. So those two cancel each other out, and so we don't have to talk about that $200 charge to the credit card.
Nice. All right. And so what happened? Why aren't you the reigning pool kingpin in the Phoenix area?
Ben, I tried. This is the reason that I failed as a salesman at GoDaddy, is I don't have the people skills to put myself out into the world and make people buy this product. Like, I tried hard. I went to retail store outlets and chains, and I talked to their product managers. I'm like, hey, like, I've got a system that we could do like gift cards, and you can sell them retail at your desk. Like, I will sell them to you for $5, and they are worth. You sell them for $20, and you get to keep like 75% of it, and I just get like one customer from it or whatever. I had a booth at the Desert Pool and Spa Show, the second largest pool professional like trade show in the country. I had a booth there.
Pearls before swine, Josh. Pearls before swine.
I don't know what that expression means, Ben.
It's a biblical expression. It means something valuable in front of people that can't appreciate it.
Oh, is that what it was? No. I spent 2 years at that trade show trying to hawk my software to people, and I gave out free trials. I went to, for at least a year, every Tuesday there was a meeting of the local pool association, and I would go there in my Pool Notes shirt, and I would give my 5-minute spiel. A couple times I raffled off a 6-month subscription to somebody. It just, I could not shove this thing down these people's throats.
Yeah. So, but how do you go from that to being an accountant? Maybe we'll have to save that for another episode.
That was because the funnest part of my job was at tax time, when I had to put all of my finances into a spreadsheet. And like, I put all of the finances in a spreadsheet. I'm like, well, I could categorize this a little better. And I create some VLOOKUPs and a couple of find functions and like really categorize it. And what I realized, like, now I realize, looking back, I spent tens of hours building what is now a very, very simple and standard profit and loss statement. And I don't,
wow.
This is what I tell all the people that ask me, is like, how did you become an accountant? Because the most interesting part of my job was asking myself the question at the end of every month, where the crap is all my money going? I'm out here in the heat working my fingers to the bone. Why am I not rich already?
Yeah, and you didn't just go from being a pool guy to being an accountant. You had to go back to college.
So, I mean, I had the post 9/11 GI Bill just sitting around doing nothing. It's going to expire eventually. So,
So you had a scholarship and you went back to school.
I made the 5-year plan, Ben. Like, I'm gonna go get my...
Which school did you go to?
University of Phoenix. All online, because I kept doing pools while I was trying to get a master's degree in accounting, which I hope, if any of my pool customers are listening, I hope this blows your mind that your pool guy was getting his master's degree in accounting. You did not appreciate me enough, you people.
And now you're a tax accountant.
And
coming up on tax season.
It is tax season. Oh, knee deep in it. My boss was gracious enough to recognize that I had potential, that I learned quickly. She gave me the opportunity, and I like to think that I have exceeded her expectations.
Nice. Well, you've exceeded my expectations.
Ben, you shouldn't have any expectations for me because I'm a terrible person.
Well, in that period from 2013 to present, I kept in touch with you because you're not a terrible person, but I stayed in the military, obviously. And I spent 5 years in Europe, which we've talked about at great length from a cultural perspective, and like what it was like to live in Italy and the things I learned in the UK. But my 2 jobs in those 2 locations are very different. When I went to Italy, I was doing an American job. I was in an American unit, and I was basically the flight commander of all the communications function on a remote base that was Italian. So there was a bunch of Americans there doing custody of nuclear weapons. But now, instead of being at the handle of the spear at the headquarters where I was managing budgets and long-term sustainment, now I'm at the point of the spear where I'm putting on my body armor and I'm on the security forces augmentee crew to go out and respond if bad guys get a hold of a nuclear weapon. I'm supposed to shoot them.
Cool. Did you shoot anybody?
Not on purpose.
I like that answer. Move on.
Yeah. So, but it was very much. Those were some of the coolest moments of my career. Like, we would do live fire exercises where I had real rounds in my gun. I was wearing night vision gear. It was foggy out, and I was crawling through the grass. And I was just like, this is what I imagined when I thought I would be in the military.
Man, that sounds like this is my Academy jadedness. That sounds like such a haze. I can see myself in that situation. Like, one part of my brain going, "This is cool." The other part of my brain going, "Why are we doing this? This is stupid. I'm never going to have to do this for real life."
Oh, but I knew why we were doing it. It made a lot of sense. I mean, we were very careful with those nuclear weapons we kept in Italy. And if a bad guy ever got a hold of them, I was the last line of defense. It was deadly serious that I knew my job.
The comm guy nerd, he's the last line because he's going to be the worst one. So we're going to put him in the back.
So I'll make this point real quick and not go super into depth about it, but the fact that the Air Force had just transformed its entire operation around some incidents that had happened in the nuclear enterprise meant that there was a terrible amount of scrutiny and stress on any nuclear job. The new Chief of Staff of the Air Force said, nuclear is our number one priority. You know how they enforce that kind of thing? With lots of scrutiny. So we had an inspection where they came to our base and there were more inspectors in the inspection team than people on my base.
That's impressive. So you had 2 inspectors for every person.
Yes. And it was horrific. Because not only did they come to inspect my job, but as the comm guy, they also said, hey, I need my phone to work, and I need a computer, and I need a network thing. And they asked for more network plugins than I had IP space allocated to my unit.
Oh, that's such a nerd problem, but a real serious one. You had to create custom subnets for the freaking inspectors.
Yes, and the colonel's banging on my door like, why won't my email work? They don't understand about the way.
Nobody cares about comm until it breaks.
Yeah. Okay. So I did that for 2 years in Italy, and it was cool. That was a cool job. You know, I was in charge of the post office and the satellite communications and the security systems for the nuclear weapons and all of their computers and networks and telephones and emails and all of the people that did all that stuff. Some great folks. We got lots of great recognition, did lots of cool things during a really high stress time in the Air Force. Alicia looks back on that time as like, I was just stressed out and at work all the time, and it was stressful, but the Air Force decided not to give me an opportunity to be an actual commander on G-series orders. So I will always look back on that time as my command tour. I was like a mini comm squadron commander, but I didn't have all of the responsibility that went along with it.
Oh, all of the stress and none of the perks.
After that, I took a tour to go for 3 years and be on exchange with the Royal Air Force in the United Kingdom. This is a completely different kind of thing. It's what we call security cooperation, where as part of our way of showing our allies that we're friends with them, we do a body swap. So they take a communications officer who's a major, and they swap it with me, and he goes to the Air Force and does a job equivalent to mine, and I go to his Air Force and do a job equivalent to his. So they sent me to the department, the Ministry of Defense level network operations center for all of the ministry's forces. And I did plans and programs for defensive cyber operations in the UK Ministry of Defense.
Spoiler alert, everyone. Ben learned that bureaucracy is bureaucracy is bureaucracy. Doesn't matter what country you're in.
So I thought I was going to be a figurehead, but it turned out that they needed me. And so I got there and they just treated me like I was a regular British troop. But because their forces aren't as well funded as ours, it's a little bit more slow paced. They got to work things out. They got to be a team. They got to figure out creative ways to do things instead of just writing checks for everything like we do in the U.S. We say we're not well funded, but we're really well funded. So when I got there, all their computers were running Windows 95.
No, not really. That's an exaggeration.
It was they were on Windows XP, and that's not an exaggeration.
But to be fair, if I had to pick a Windows operating system that was antiquated to run on, it would be XP.
But by the time I left, we had made substantial steps into migrating to the cloud. We were running the latest version of Windows, and we were in Office 365 on a cloud-based subscription. So it was a really interesting time to be there.
That is a cool. All right, so for all the nerds in the audience, that is a really cool time to be a part. That's a cool transition to be a part of.
And it's a good thing to have in my resume that I think will be applicable on the outside. And it was disappointing to do all that cool stuff for the UK forces and then have the Air Force do what the Air Force does, where they just send me to my next tour. Like, they don't care that I did all that cool stuff and it doesn't matter to anyone.
This is why I quit, because I figured out 8 years before you did that the Air Force does not care about you, Ben Rich. You are a cog in their machine, sir. Wherever you fit, they're going to shove you in there whether you like it or not.
So while I was there, I wrote policy that's still in effect, that I was the one that wrote, and it's published in the regulations and signed by their officers, but it's stuff Ben Rich wrote. I made budget decisions. I was an engineering authority. I would show up to meetings, and I would be the only one from my group, and someone would say, someone needs to make a decision about this, and they would look at me, and I would make the decision, and everyone would do what I said.
That's cool.
I got to deploy for the Queen of England, and I went to the Middle East, and I had a regional job where I was monitoring communications installations for strategic, like fiber installations and SATCOM shots and those kinds of things. And I was flying all around the Middle East. It was amazing.
Did they give you one of their British bullpup rifles?
Yes. Yeah, I was trained on that rifle.
I'm so jealous, because those are the coolest assault rifles. The real short ones with the magazine that goes into the stock.
Yeah, way cool. And then I got sent back to the U.S., and ever since then I've been an action officer on staffs. And unfortunately, the way that the U.S. treats my tour in the U.K., it was a very critical time in my career, and my records didn't contain the markers that they needed, and it destroyed my chances for promotion and kind of put me on a track where I'm basically going to be doing the same thing for the rest of my career.
What Ben's not saying there is that he's too nice of a guy. He didn't cause enough of a ruckus. He didn't get on enough people's lists. And so, like, he is exceptional to the point where he's invisible. Like, he's just one of those troopers in the background that makes sure everything actually happens in the military that has to happen, but he's not self-centered enough to demand the recognition and the kudos for the job that he's done.
Thank you for saying that. The part about this that's so deeply offensive to me is from the time I joined the military until now, I was on a track where I expected, as long as I kept meeting the expectations that were given to me, that I would continue progressing, and that stopped. And now, not only do I not get to take the next steps and do the next things and get more responsibility and do those cooler things, but my life, and this is more meaningful to me than that, is kind of bereft of the respect that comes with making progress. Because a lot of people around me, even if they don't get a chance to know me, just look at me and judge me really quick based on the fact that I've been in 16 years and I've not yet been promoted to lieutenant colonel. So they minimize me, they discount me, they don't value me, they don't give me responsibility, and it really it hurts my soul in a really deep and profound way.
Well, that's only assuming that you derive your self-worth from the gratification that you give to people around you. Or
some of it I do. Well, don't everyone does. Anyone that says they don't care what other people think is lying.
I legitimately don't care what other people think.
Everybody cares what other people think.
Okay.
You're calling it something else, but you still care.
All right, so if I care about what other people think 10%, you care about what other people think like 80% in this scenario. Like, you can't...
It's not just that.
You can't derive your self-worth from how these idiots are perceiving you because you didn't have enough stratifications on your OPR, Ben.
So Malcolm Gladwell says job satisfaction is based on three things: autonomy, complexity, and a relationship between work and reward. And when you are a passed over major in the Air Force, they'll still let you get to retirement, but you lose like two of those three things. And it just really sucks a lot of the job satisfaction out of life.
Complexity and reward? Like, they're not paying you enough?
Complexity and autonomy.
Oh, autonomy. Yeah, that's absolutely true. As a major, you're a cog. And major, I need you to do this.
Yeah, that's it. So,
all right. So you talk about this like you're not, like, the instant that you're out of the military, you're not going to get scooped up by one of the thousands of contacts that you've made in the world that are all in very lucrative private sector organizations. They're going to be like, holy crap, Ben Rich is available. Like, your LinkedIn profile is going to exist for precisely 24 hours before you are employed.
I hope that's the case, Josh. But unlike you, I didn't know where I wanted to go, so I also have to make that decision. Not just where I want to go, but what I want to do. I mean, and the possibilities are endless. I could go back to teaching middle school. I could get a government job that cares about the fact that I still have a top secret security clearance, or I could go do something completely off the wall and nothing to do with any of that.
Like you can be a pool guy in Phoenix, Arizona for no reason.
Yeah.
I'll try. I've got guys that can train you.
I've kind of woven this throughout, but I edited it out last time, and I want to repeat it because throughout all of these jobs that I had, from my first job at Taco Bell or being a babysitter mowing lawns in the neighborhood to being a staff officer at U.S. CENTCOM in Tampa, Florida, I've learned a lot of lessons. And I like to, as you point out, I like to focus on the positive things. So these are going to kind of have a positive spin, but they aren't all positive. All kinds of work are worthy of respect, everything. So I try to be respectful of people around me, up and down and across, because whether you're a bin lorry driver or you're making burritos at Taco Bell or you're a staff officer at a MAGCOM headquarters, your work is worthy of respect.
Like me saying that I disagree with that sentiment makes me sound like a horrible person, but I genuinely disagree with that sentiment. Because there are...
Society works because there's infinity roles and everyone just does a role. I'm grateful for the people that do this stuff I wouldn't be willing to do, or the ones that do the stuff I can't do.
Here's the thing, is there's a spectrum of people that exist out there, and I recognize that some people do things because they choose to do it. The teachers that could get a much better job, but they choose to teach because they want to enrich the lives of younger children. They are worthy of respect and admiration. But then there are other people in other jobs that they work this job because something about their personality or their life choices, they literally cannot get anything better. Like this.
I get it. The joke about the sloths running the DMV in Zootopia, we all laugh at that, but we've also had a horrible experience at the DMV. It's like there's a certain kind of person that works there.
Yeah, there are fast food work. I remember, I will never forget, I was going through a drive-through with my dad as a kid. And the guy that was coming out of the speaker box was super pumped up and was like, "Hey, how are you guys doing today? What can I get for you?" And he was super energetic, pumped up. My dad looked at me and he told me, "That guy's going to be here for 1 week max, and he's going to get promoted or he's going to get a better job and he'll be gone." And
do you know the rest of the story?
Well, we went back to that Taco Bell the same day every week because pool guys, you go to the same physical geographic locations and you're at the same locations at about the same time every day. So you eat at the same restaurants like a routine. And yeah, that guy was there one more time, and then the week after he was gone, promoted, gone somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, I was the employee of the month at Best Buy, but I only worked there until it's time for me to go off to college.
This is what I'm saying, is the people that... if you pour your feelings and your love and your devotion into a job, you're only going to be there for as long as you want to be there. You will be picked up or some other opportunity will cross your path because people recognize that kind of dedication and motivation.
I like that.
People that are but then that leaves you with the people that get that job and then they stay there. Either they're staying there because it's a deliberate choice, or they're staying there because they don't have the opportunities to progress.
And that goes into my next note, which is bloom where you're planted. And I think, as long as you find a way to meaningfully contribute to wherever you are, that you will be successful and it will help lead to better things. One thing I had to learn in the military is that when sometimes you'll have to make a decision where one of your best people will go on and do something better. And you have to be happy for them and support them, even if it means that you're going to suffer when they leave because they were awesome and they were doing great things here. You just have to support them and be happy for them to go do the better thing.
I have no comment to that. That's positive. So we can just go on to your next lesson.
Okay. So there's one lesson I feel like I still haven't learned because I'm struggling with it right now. And that is I've always been good at like the dad kind of role, like when I was in middle school and also interacting with people that are above me. But I've just never been much good at peer relationships. It's still the most challenging thing for me is to interact with peers, to cooperate with them. And in the military, unfortunately, they pit you against each other a lot of the time. And it's just, I've never found a good way to work this out.
Well, I'm not going to offer any solutions to you because I've always been in positions where I feel like my peers were either underperforming or deliberately like screwing up. Like, I don't know. I've never been satisfied with my peer group in a professional capacity.
Yeah. I look back on the peers that I had that I still have good relationships with, like you and one or two people from each job I'm at. And I think of how much I value those relationships, but they feel like the exception rather than the rule.
I like to think that I was exceptional. I have a bunch of awards that speak to that, and a bunch of people told me I was exceptional my entire life. But, it's still nice to hear it every once in a while, so thanks, Ben.
You are exceptional. But if you train a bunch of company-grade officers to all be exceptional, it just turns them into, like, they compete with each other, and it's not good for the organization.
Yeah, the only way to... War games problem again. Like, it's an interesting game. The only way to win is not to play.
There's another version of this I learned that was important. There's something that's very tempting to fall into when you're part of an organization that's very complex. You're a little cog in a big machine, and it's easy for you to understand your immediate circle of influence and the things that you have to do, but it's harder to understand what's happening around you. And sometimes people make the base assumption that we're the hard workers and everyone else is lazy. Look at them, they're lazy, they're not working hard, they don't do. But really, I've found time and time again throughout my life that really I just don't understand their job yet. And if there's someone and I look at them and I think they're just being lazy, it's not that they are, it's just that I don't understand yet. And I've found that if I change my baseline assumption to I just don't understand yet, instead of they're lazy until they prove different, it really helps grease the interaction and improve the way I think about them and the way that we work together. And I've always found myself happier in life now that I start with the baseline assumption that everyone has a meaningful thing to do.
That took me a long time to learn that assumption on how to approach people. Is you assume that everybody is trying to do the right thing and they're trying their best to do the thing that they are supposed to be doing.
Yes,
and you assume that right up to the point where they fail you and they don't meet expectations, and then you write them off completely, and then then they are the worthless POS that you're talking about.
So there was a management style that was popular. I don't know when. I'll have to put it in the show notes, but it was this idea that 80% of the work is done by 20% of the workforce. It really led into that late 90s, early 2000s Jack Welch style of leadership, where they would every year fire 10% of the workforce, identify the chaff and weed them out, and we'll have a more efficient organization. Well, obviously the military isn't doing that, but that idea kind of leaked into the military. 80% of the work is done by 20% of the people. But I had a wise leader once when I was a missionary that recognized when that idea started to leak into the mission that it's just very caustic and doesn't value everyone's contribution. Just because someone isn't the superstar or the most productive person doesn't mean that they can't also do something that you couldn't, or maybe reach someone or do something you're not willing to do. And that 100% of the work is done by 100% of the people.
That sounds very participation ribbon snowflakey type of mentality, what you just said there, Ben. Because
I get it.
I recognize what you're trying to say is that you're going to have your fast burners and you're going to have your special cases. And you should value everybody the same. But the fact is you don't and you can't. The fast burner is going to get the jobs that actually matter because they need to get done and they're important. So I'm going to give them to the guy that actually knows what he's doing. And then the special kid, yeah, you know what? He can take some attention and maybe with some mentorship and some life changes and just the right amount of input, he could be better. But people like you have that kind of energy and dedication to making the lives of others better. Me, I just wrote them off oh, that guy's lazy and worthless. I'm not going to worry about him.
How many times, though, and this is, I think that if you're saying the 80-20 rule holds and that 80% of the work is done by 20% of the people, then that means you have 80% of your workforce that are performing suboptimally. And that is a huge opportunity to improve your organization. But if every time you mentor your entirety of your group, you're talking about being one of the 20%, you are leaving that 80% contribution on the floor. You're not even going for it. And I think if you change your approach, instead of saying everyone needs to be number one and saying, hey, we can all succeed as a team, there's such a better opportunity there. And that's my leadership philosophy, having gone through all of that. That when you talk to a group of 30 people and talk to number one, there's at least half of the people that go, I am not, nor will I ever be number one, and I don't feel valued here.
Yeah, you're one of those people. You just said that. Yeah. You're talking about how you don't have the autonomy that you want as the 16-year major, and that's exactly what you're referring to. You are being perceived as part of that 80%. And it feels bad, and that's why you don't want to perpetuate it, because do unto others kind of stuff, Ben.
All right. enough of my sour grapes. So there's one last thing I want to talk about, and that is you and I have talked about how in the military, when they're trying to prepare you to be a leader, they send you around to jobs, and you live in this constant state of disequilibrium, where as soon as you feel like you're getting good at your job, then they move you to something else completely new, and then you can be bad at that until when you're almost good at it, and then they move you again. Well, that's great when you want to become a colonel, and now you kind of have this vague awareness of all the things that you're responsible for because you did all of it at some point in the past. But eventually you become jack of all trades, master of none. And when you get out, now what do? I'm worried about that. You know, I'm 4 years away from getting out. Like, what kind of job do I apply for? Do I go back and compete with recent college graduates?
Well, and this is the problem, is you can't compete technically because you don't have technical skills anymore. And if you, so you're talking about you want to compete at managerial or executive level jobs. Well, executive level jobs are 100% networked. Like, you can't, nobody's going to post an Indeed ad for a COO. That just doesn't happen. So then now you're looking at, you want a management job somewhere. Guess what, Ben? Organizations, for the most part, by and large, hire management internally. So, like, you're going to have to put in time somewhere. So if you're planning on just beating the street and knocking on doors and throwing your resume at people, it's going to be bad. You're going to get not quite entry level, but a little bit higher than that. But you're still going to have to put in the time in the organization before anybody trusts you enough to give you any actual responsibility. In the worst case scenario, you're probably going to have to wait for somebody in management to leave, get fired, or retire before you have the opportunity to even put your name in the ring. However,
well, my last attempt at networking failed, so I'm going to have to give it another go.
This entire conversation is predicated on the fact that I have no networking skills and no contacts anywhere for any reason about anything. You, on the other hand, are the world's friendliest guy, and everybody is aware that you're an amazing person, and anybody that's interacted with you for more than 10 minutes knows how dedicated and hardworking you are. So just calm yourself, because I promise you, you'll make a couple phone calls, or the word will get around in your Illuminati LDS circles, and you'll get some job at like a temple somewhere, if nothing else.
All right. Well, to be continued on that one. Well, that brings us to the end of what I thought would just be a 1 hour discussion on one podcast, and it turned into like 2.5 hours spread across 2 episodes. So thank you for going on that journey with me, Josh. I appreciate it.
Was that a journey? I thought we were reminiscing about kind of the stupid things we've done through our lives.
It was, but we were also, I think it was 2 middle-aged men kind of pondering on the role of work in our existence.
Oh, God, that sounds like the worst podcast to listen to. Why are we talking about this?
Well, if there's anyone out there still listening, Josh and I, probably on episode 42 or 43, will review our next book. So this is your opportunity to go on social media and interact with us. It's time for a nonfiction title. So we, between the two of us, have nominated 2 titles. And if you are the only person that goes and votes, you might be the deciding vote here. So I'll put this up as a poll on Reddit. I'll put a link to it on Facebook. We will either read To Be Honest by Michael Leviton or Virus of the Mind by Richard Brodie. I will talk about To Be Honest real quick, and then Josh can talk about Virus of the Mind. To Be Honest by Michael Leviton is about this man who was taught by his parents at a very young age to never tell a lie. And I'm not talking like George Washington and the cherry tree here. I'm talking about like never, whenever you open your mouth, does anything even remotely untrue ever come out of your mouth. And what it was like for him to live his life. Fascinating book.
That sounds like it would be better as a fiction premise, like the movie Liar Liar with Jim Carrey. But that's fine. Like, that's Ben's pick, obviously. My pick was Virus of the Mind, which is a look at the study of ideas as if they were living organisms. And so you think of just any kind of idea, like religion, monogamous relationships, civilization, organized government, specialization, like any idea like that, and track it through history as if it was a living thing, and how that kind of different perspective on looking back can change and provide insight into how we evolved as a species.
Well, that book sounds fascinating, and I'm going to read it no matter what, but those are your 2 choices. So I'll put those up on Reddit and put a link on Facebook, and you can go and take care of that. So there's one plea I want to make that we've made in the past that I want to make again, and that is, if you've been a long time listener to the podcast, you recently started listening to the podcast, and you like us, go on your podcast app of choice and put a rating in the app for our podcast. And that will help it get some visibility and potentially get in the hands of and ears of new listeners. And appreciate those of you that have already. And if you haven't yet, just take a second, go in the iTunes store or whatever podcast app of choice and give us a rating. We really appreciate that.
That's funny. Ben's going to go digital. I'm going to stick with my analog thing. If you love what we do, share us with a friend. I feel like that's the least you could do. If you can't get enough of us and want to ensure that we're going to keep doing this forever, consider becoming a patron on our Patreon for as little as, I don't know, what's the minimum you can donate? Like $1 a month? Yeah. We do put bonus episodes out there. We're trying to do better at putting out bonus content or free things, or we just did a couple of giveaways in the Christmas season for our Patreon subscribers. So if you really want to make sure that this goes on forever, that's the best way to do it.